Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice Pool Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we have yet another interesting show for you, which really should be no surprise. For the moment, though, let me introduce you to the people who would be my first pick for Space Force. My co-hosts and friends, GM Huzz, GM Flano, and GM Kaitlin. How are we all this evening?
Well, I'm doing quite well.
Oh.
Yeah, pretty good.
And what about you, Kaitlin, all far away?
Yeah, doing really well. All settled here in the States now, which is very exciting and also very terrifying in the same breath.
Indeed. But wait, for a special treat for all of you, we have a very special guest to join us muggles here at the Dice Pool Podcast, host of the Order 66 podcast, our friend GM Chris, better known as Chris Witt, just in case there is someone out there who haven't heard of you at all. However unlikely that is, why don't you introduce yourself to the Dice Pool Podcast listeners?
What is up, Gamer Nation? And I think I'm actually better known as GM Chris, actually.
Well, that might be true too. Well, to me, you're known as Chris Witt. But anyway, that's all right.
Yeah, that's me. Well, hello, Gamer Nation. Thanks for having me on, guys. I've been really eager to talk about this topic, so I'm thrilled, I'm pumped, I'm jacked, excited, and all that. But yeah, I'm obviously one of the hosts of the Order 66 podcast, and for those of you listeners who are not familiar with the Order 66 podcast, we've been podcasting about Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars system since it launched, and for about 5 years prior to that, we actually podcasted about the prior Star Wars system, Star Wars Saga Edition, published by Wizards of the Coast. And we've been running Order 66 for over 10 years. Wow. And the D20 Radio Network with it, of which the Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member. And we're proud to have it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, 10 years. That's insane. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I was 10 years younger 10 years ago.
Surprisingly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shocking. Shock and awe.
Were you still in high school then, Caitlin, by some small chance?
No, thankfully. I was a free bird at that stage, but not by very long, maybe a year or so out of high school.
There you go.
You made me do math then, and I really did appreciate that.
Yes,
but no, so yeah, 10 years ago, I would have been just out of high school.
Wow, there you go. Cool. Well, anyway, thank you very much, though, Chris, for coming on. It's the first time that we've had a co-host as such. We've certainly had Sam Stewart as a special guest, but you are officially our first co-host for the show.
Honored,
thanks, man.
I tell you.
One of us.
One of us.
So we always ask what everybody's been up to gaming-wise. So, Mike, what have you been up to this week?
Well, I've been doing a lot of role-playing, as you guys know. All of you at the table, well, except for Caitlin, because she's very far away.
Yes.
But we're planning to organise a Discord game, so Caitlin can keep on role-playing with us, which is good.
Yes, please.
Been playing a bit of L5R beta.
Yes.
Well, we can talk about that, because that's well known, and we're very excited for the...
very excited.
I know Flano's very excited for it, but I have growing excitement for the L5R RPG once it drops.
Absolutely.
So we've been playing a bit of that, and that's a lot of fun. Playing high-level characters, which we haven't done, and now that we've played some high-level characters, I have a new appreciation for the system. Now that I can see what you can do and what cool stuff you can have your character doing.
You're capable of.
Yeah,
you
really
don't see that.
Exactly. It really paints a picture of who your character is. And I think all of us at the table could probably say the same thing. It's really good.
Yeah.
Other than RPGs, I've been doing my usual thing, lots of wargaming. I picked up a new wargaming system, like usual. I'm playing War Master now, which is a old school GW game.
Wow.
That came out in 2000. This is like the unofficial second edition that I'm playing.
Yep.
It's like fans have picked up the game and moved it forwards. And it's a 10mm fantasy mass combat game.
Oh.
So you have like maybe 400, 500 individual dudes on the table.
Yep.
So it's quite...
It's like an epic scale
Yeah,
type thing.
you could say that. It's very, very tactical. It's more reliant on how you play opposed to how many tricks you can pull out of your bag.
Right.
Which I enjoy more because it rewards tactical gameplay than, being a tricksy person.
Yeah, any game that does that is pretty
Exactly.
strong.
Yeah.
Cool.
Other than that, playing a few other miniature games here and there. I've been playing a bit of Gaslands.
What's Gaslands?
Gaslands is
Yeah.
it's a really cool game where you essentially go out and buy some Hot Wheels cars or whatever
Right.
similar scale cars you can find for very, very cheap. You convert them up, paint them up to look like Mad Max inspired vehicles, so post-apocalyptic vehicles with weapons and armor plating. Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic.
That looks cool. Yeah.
Then you race each other and shoot each other on the table. And the rules are just magnificent. Like, I was a bit dubious because it's hard to emulate racing in a tabletop game.
Yep.
But the guy who has written these rules has just done a stellar job. And he's incorporated what gear you're in your cars is how many times you can act in a turn. So if you're in fifth gear, you can act in the fifth turn of the round.
Oh, wow.
So if your car's going really, really fast and really, really high gear, you will eventually pace forwards and outstrip everyone else. But it's similar to X-Wing in the fact that there is movement templates.
Okay.
So, and in some gears, you can't do some templates. Like if you want to do a really
they're
sharp
dangerous.
turn. Or they're dangerous. Some you just can't do. And I've seen plenty of cars just drive off the table because they can't complete a turn in time, and it's hilarious when it happens.
Wow.
But yeah, it's one of the cheapest games in the world. The rulebook's very, very cheap. It's PDF.
It sounds very
But you actually shoot your opponent at the table.
Yeah, you have you can.
I didn't think. I mean, I live in Texas and we don't do that.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. It's,
wow.
But yeah, it's what the biggest appeal to me is that there's no set cars. You make your cars. So you strap on weapons and equipment and bits and pieces. Cool. You can have a war band or crew of like say 5 cars, or you can have 2 performance cars. And my ultimate goal is to have, which I've got the miniature for, the car for at home, is the DeLorean from Back to the Future.
Oh, that's cool.
So my goal is to have the DeLorean as my performance car, and then the Volkswagen van, which chases Marty in Back to the Future 1, as the car that's also in the same crew, that are used to bump the DeLorean forwards and make it go faster.
Oh, wow.
So that's my little themey crew that I'm planning on building. So we have a Ukrainian guy with an RPG sticking up out of the back. As he's chasing DeLorean as it hits 88 miles per hour. So,
Wow.
That's my gaming experience for the last couple of weeks anyway.
There you go.
Yeah.
And hello to all of our Ukrainian listeners.
Ukrainian? He gets the stuff from somewhere.
Yeah,
Right,
yes.
yes. He steals it from
Some European countries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, I went out.
It fell off truck.
No, I went out and I bought some miniatures, Hot Wheel cars for this, but I haven't yet had a game. Need to make it happen.
Well, I picked up a TIE Fighter, first order TIE Fighter. I'm going to make my attack chopper.
As a Hot Wheel, yeah. It was an actual Hot Wheel.
Yeah, it's going to be
first
great.
order.
As long as you don't get like the Star Wars Hot Wheels that sort of have got
I've got
like,
one. I've got a Lando-inspired car. That's my
Yeah.
main performance car on my current crew.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I've painted it all up and it looks very nice.
Yeah,
like in terms, it doesn't look like a Hot Wheels car anymore.
Yeah.
But if you look at the number plate, it says Lando.
Yeah.
Wow. That is cool.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
But in terms of gaming for myself,
Sorry, Martin, we didn't ask you, did we? No.
it's okay. I'm not offended. I'm just wounded internally.
Wow, that's fine.
But no, I've been playing the Infinity tabletop, which has been great. I did that a little bit. L5R, I'm absolutely...
Because you're running L5R for us.
I am,
And you're doing
yes.
an amazing job, mind you.
Yeah, I don't think so. But
Yeah, you are.
well, the rules are, relatively new to me. So getting my head around that is a big job.
It's amazing, though, isn't it? It's
Oh,
absolutely
it's a
amazing.
beautiful system.
It is.
Absolutely
It's
beautiful.
deadly as all hell,
As
though.
GM Hooly discovered last night, to much rage.
Oh,
What do you mean my character's not much dead?
Up to the first round. What? Wow. Deadly indeed.
but that's part of the charm of the game.
Yeah.
And I'm getting right into it, and I can't wait to actually play it as well. Not run it, play it. But other than that, I'm super excited because my computer is back up and running, and I can play video games again. Because
There has been an ongoing saga. If you didn't know,
it's been
Chris,
going for months.
poor old Martin has had green screens of death which I didn't even think was possible. But
These graphics
Because my
are being
graphics
displayed
card
now.
died and didn't actually die for like 3 months. It was just green on all my games, and I'm like, what is going on?
I believe I said to you from day one, Martin, that is your graphics card. And Martin,
game's
I
still
can
played.
vouch for that because I was present. I heard it. And it was one of those things is, no, it can't be that. No, it's your graphics card. No. It's graphics card. No, it's not that.
Until it actually died, and then I had to rip it out and got it under warranty, and that took them a month to fill. So now I have my card back, and I can actually play.
well, silver lining is at least it was under warranty still.
That's it.
Because graphics cards are dumb expensive at the moment, thanks to Bitcoins.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kaitlin, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
So I have been joining my boyfriend's games now that I am here officially, moved to the States. So I've been joining in on his Star Wars campaign, his RPG, which has been really, really cool. He's GMing a Clone Wars series. But he also made a horrible mistake in actually inviting me to the table and saying that I could make any character that I wanted.
Oh, no.
And I was like, no, you got to give me some kind of parameters, like what's going on. He's like, no, do whatever you want. So I am a Hut sniper who is incredibly stealthy. No one can see. I've also got all the armor because we're something like 600x. Like we're really like XP'd out. So I've got all the armor. I hover around and sniper, and I've also got these little droids like attached to my back, and I can send them out to go and find things for me. And I'm my next thing now that I can follow through on anything that I want to do is he's going to have a hutlet next. I'm going to find a way of getting that to make that happen, and it's going to happen. But the game is really exciting. I'm really enjoying it so far. We're going up against Asajj in the next session that we're going to have, which is actually tomorrow. So I'm very excited to see how I can work this Hut sniper in some way to actually get some damage. His damage is pretty cool too, I will say.
So, Kat, sorry to interrupt you, but the Knights of Fate book that just came out, literally just came out, has
I've looked through it myself.
Yeah. Look at the back 3 pages because there are rules for followers and apprentices and I don't know, hutlets maybe.
Wow.
Ooh, I didn't see that, but now I'm definitely going to because as soon as I saw some of the pictures of Jabba the Hutt's hutlet recently, I was like, yeah, that's definitely going to happen because it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. And plus, you can't give me freedom to do whatever I want in these games and not expect me to do something crazy like a Hut sniper.
We know.
But other than that, in terms of gaming,
I was going to say, Kat, that when Mama Hut meets Daddy, no, anyway, seriously.
Because they're actually they're like frogs. So that's how Jabba can have one because they don't need another partner. They just need to.
Yeah, they're asexual.
But a Hut in the old lore,
it can happen. Just give me some time.
Well, in the old lore with Huts, it could have changed now, but in the older lore, a Hut infant gestated inside the mother Hut for I think 20 years.
Good.
Before it actually births.
Wow.
Yeah, fun fact for you right there.
There you go.
Well, there you go.
GM Huzz's Hut
maybe
facts.
that's I can flip a pip. I can flip a story point.
Yep.
And I've been gestating this entire time. You just didn't know. I hit it very well.
You can't tell when a Hut's pregnant. It just sort of floats around inside of its mass. So yeah.
That's disturbing.
Well, the thing is, you can. It's just you never should ask a Hut if they're pregnant or not, because you never know what's going to happen to you.
Just a pro tip. Just don't be around. Just don't be around when it's water breaks because.
Oh my god!
How do you tell though? It's a Hut.
That's true.
It's a little. It's not as slimy.
There's an unusually amount of fluid.
It's a
flood.
tsunami. Yeah, lovely. Moving along.
Exactly.
Right, how did this turn
Moving
into
right along, some other games that I've been looking
Yes,
at and what's been really exciting to play has been the Gloomhaven board game, which just came out as well. And I've got to say, it is awesome. Like we've done through one mission and playing through that and developing our characters and playing basically like a RPG D&D tile game on a board game with the tiles and everything. It was really cool. I've been really enjoying that, and I would highly recommend anyone out there who likes playing board games and likes this type of thing to give it a look and give it a play because it is seriously a lot of fun.
I picked that box up in a gaming store a few months ago, and I nearly fell over because I wasn't prepared for the weight of that box.
Oh, really?
It's insane. It's like, what is this? It feels like there's 2 blessed bricks inside the box. It's crazy.
But it's real. It's so cool. Everything comes individually, like packaged, right?
Yeah.
And so depending on how you play the game, certain envelopes can be opened. So, like, we've been really careful in terms of, like, okay, don't open anything until it's actually time to open it, because there's these big reveals, and it's all depend on, like, narratively how your characters play out. It's really cool. I'm really enjoying it. I can't wait for the next session of that.
Cool.
A friend of the podcast, Josh Bruce, he was so close to buying that. He hummed it hard. I really wish he did, but he didn't end up.
Oh, yeah.
It was one of his board game binges, and then he bought about 10 billion board games, but he didn't buy that one, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, he definitely should have. It was a mistake.
I'll peer pressure him some more next time he goes into a board game binge.
With enthusiasm to make sure he actually does it.
I try my best. I got very, very close a couple of times. It just fell through.
Wow. Chris, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
Wow, I've actually had a fair bit of gaming the last couple of weeks. Kind of shockingly, we had our monthly session recently for actually a GM Chance, Chris Bradshaw, his monthly game. I actually get to play in, which is kind of a rarity. He took the old Wizards of the Coast Living Force modules back when they had a living campaign running.
Right.
And he rewrote them for FFG Star Wars system.
Wow.
And so he's running us through that. And I have my character I love, Tupaka, who is a Wookiee performer.
Right.
And he's absolutely fantastic.
I love that name, by the way. It is every single time I see it on Facebook, scrolling through, it just makes me laugh and smile.
He's absolutely fantastic. Basically, he's not really Pac. He's more like Wookiee Kanye West. Very intentionally, but anyway. Just recently, I got to get the chance to be a GM for our monthly Patreon Skype game for D20 Radio's Patreon.
Yep.
And I actually ran them. I ran Genesis for them. And I actually ran them through my new, almost very close to being released setting of Familiar, which Ian and Kaitlin were actually good enough to help me co-develop. And so I'm really looking forward to that, and maybe getting another game, maybe out there, maybe played.
Yes, we might have to record it.
Maybe. I don't know. That went extremely well.
Cool.
But gosh, last weekend I got really drunk with some friends, and we played. You guys know I have a fetish for one-page RPGs.
Yes. Yes.
Like micro RPGs. We played one called what's it called? It was called a flask full of gasoline. That's the name of the RPG.
Wow. Okay.
And
Tell us
you can
more.
Google it.
Sounds explosive.
You can Google it. It's really stupid and really fun, and you get really drunk when you're playing it. The rules mandate a flask full of gasoline, or you can fill it with incredibly hard liquor. And I'm quoting the rules here, if you're a wussy. And so for us, it was filled with, I forget what, but it was 160 proof something, I think.
Oh, God.
And then you have, every character has a shot glass that's also filled with normal booze. And there are no dice. The resolution mechanic, and I'm not kidding, literally involves, you sit around the table from each other, and you literally have a bullet that you flick at your opponent, and if it lands in their shot glass, you've succeeded on whatever you're trying to do.
Wow.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. And it's got a very John Wick kind of vibe to it, or 100 Bullets, or very it's kind of gritty and hilarious and crazy. But yeah, you can Google it. And then just today, I got the chance to get a board game on the table with my almost 8-year-old daughter.
Cool.
We played Photosynthesis.
Yes.
I would highly recommend if you've not picked it up.
I've seen that played. It's it looks amazing from visually. It's fantastic. I don't know how the game is played itself, but
I was shocked, and both my wife too was also shocked at actually how good it was. But it is a mixture of an abstract strategy game and a tactical resource management game.
Yep.
Where you're, as you know, you're obviously growing trees. Like, that's the game. You're growing trees. And where you place them on the board matters because as the rounds go by, the sun literally starts shifting around the board, and there's a token to do that. And literally, the direction the sun is shining and the distance your trees and other things are from it is how much energy they can get that round. So it's like and like tall trees of your opponents block your trees depending on where the sun is. It was shockingly good. I was surprised.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
that sounds good.
yeah, highly recommend it.
Very good. All right. Well, as far as what I've been up to, the sort of gaming that I've done is pretty much what you guys have been doing.
Yeah.
We've been playing a little bit of Genesis. We've been playing a little bit of Star Wars. And obviously last night with L5R, which I've massively fallen in love with and have promised to run a campaign at some point down the track. As Martin says, yay. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun. And I've tried to fill my entire weekend with gaming because this weekend was my birthday. So that's what I like to do during that period of time, which is great. Got some news, which I can't discuss, but we'll talk about that, I'm sure, at a later stage down the track. Yep. But anyway, in the meantime, we've...
Cool story.
I know.
Cool story, bro.
And we got Star Wars tonight as well.
We do have some Star Wars tonight too. So, and then I've also got a crossover episode of monstrous proportions to do tomorrow with the guys from the Movie Defenders, and I believe that Chris and Dave and Phil and about 10 people, is it, Chris, that are going to be on this thing?
At least, yeah.
It's going to be huge. So we're all about crossovers at the moment with the D20 Radio Network, which is really cool. I know that Phil wants to come on the show as well at some point, so we'll make that happen. Well, gang, we've got a lot to discuss this episode, lots of magical things. So should we get into our show topic for tonight?
Don't you mean core of the show?
Yes, I do mean core of the show. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesys Role Playing Game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, last episode we spoke about using story points, but tonight we crack open our spellbooks, whip out our wands, beckon our familiars, and get our cauldrons boiling to take a look at magic. Now, the basis of what we're going to be discussing is covered within the Genesys Core Rulebook on page 210, and has been further detailed within the recently released Realms of Terrinoth book from page 115, for those who are following on at home. Now, you all know, and as we have discussed previously on the show, that there have been further adaptations and content developed around magic, with some fan work, obviously from ourselves, using Night's Edge, as well as work that I'm sure our guest host Chris can provide some more background on. Now, Chris, you've developed your own setting using magic, haven't you, with Familiar, is that right?
Well, so I started, that's my most recent, The first theme I ever wrote for Genesys and was released last year for our D20 Radio followers and those who contributed to the Kickstarter for Gamer Nation Con 5. And it will actually be publicly available. We'll make it publicly available in, August.
Yep.
Was a rather lengthy, roughly 80-page theme supplement for Harry Potter. And getting to understand magic, that was like jumping into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, it's kind of the core thing of Harry Potter, isn't it?
Without
it, what is Harry Potter other than a weirdo who lives underneath the stairs?
Pretty much. Pretty much. And so I really had to really just dive into the magic rules and really start deconstructing them and understanding them. And then and obviously, Ian, you were a big help to me, especially when it came to development and editing on that particular theme.
Yeah.
You and I did some work together on that.
Yep.
And then most recently, I decided, okay, IPs are fun, but let me do something original. And so I've created a new setting called Familiar, where literally all of the PCs are familiars in terms of arcane magical animals. That operate at a very small scale. And it was a little bit of turning the traditional RPG experience on its head. And for that setting, obviously magic was also a key component, but I had to deconstruct it even more and really kind of shackle it in a very concrete way in order to represent the limited nature of familiar heroes. And in developing how to sort of shackle magic mechanically, I again had to dive into the nuts and bolts of magic in order to make that work within the theme. So, yeah, I've I've been living in the Genesys magic rules, I think more so than any other Genesys rules for about the past year.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Cool. Now, speaking of someone who
Wait a minute. So it's fair to say, Chris is very familiar with the magic rules.
One
yes.
might say that.
And the puns
One might say
begin.
Well, I was asking
And I must say, I am very grateful to have someone who has been living and breathing these magic rules for so long, because I am going to put a disclaimer up here. I am so green to magic rules within the Genesys system in general, so I'm going to be asking probably a lot of the stupid questions throughout this. So picking up some of the slack that I'm bringing to the podcast right now, Chris, thanks very much.
Yo, more than happy to.
And Mike, okay, so let's sort of touch base on very quickly about as far as how much sort of experience we have, because obviously Genesys has been out for some time now. So what we did, or what I did, is that we put out the call to say that we were going to do this episode and asked people if they wanted any questions asked as far as magic, because there is a lot of discussion topics out there. We got inundated. So there is no surprise that this may turn into a 2-part episode. Just saying.
We'll see how we go.
Absolutely. All right, so let's start breaking down magic. Let's sort of do it on a Magic 101, because Kaitlin, as she said, is a fairly new player to the magic way of doing anything. We've sort of done some of that with Night's Edge as well, where we've sort of turned it on its head a little bit and changed it around.
Well, so Caitlin's not feeling alone too in this situation. I'm fairly, I know I've read through the magic rules, but I haven't used it in practice.
Yeah.
My expertise more leans towards equipment and weapons and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
to me, this episode will be a bit of a learning curve for me as well in terms of what can be done. Like, I understand the concepts of magic, just not the nitty gritty crunch.
Yeah,
I'm not great at answering rules questions. That's overly accurate on magic.
I think I'm the only one that's both written stuff for the magic system and played with it.
Yeah.
So, of us,
So basically it. Right. So okay. So let's really look at the nitty gritty, the absolute basics. If you've never touched magic at all when it comes to Genesys, where do we start? So Chris, perhaps you could give us a bit of a rundown on the very basics of where we go.
Sure. So here's the best way I explain it to people, okay, especially new players dealing with it. The way magic works in Genesys is it gets very, very, very specific, and then a little broader, and then infinitely broad. Okay, there are 3 levels to think of when you think of magic. The first and most important level is the skills. Okay, at least in terms of the core rules. Terrinoth, the runebound setting adds a bit more to this, but at least in terms of the core rules, there are 3 skills that are used for magic. Right, Arcana, Divine, and Primal.
Yep.
And those skills correspond to the traditional, at least in terms of fantasy, the traditional schools, broad terms of schools of magic, in terms of wizardly characters or sorcerers, clerics or divine magic users, and then primal, the druids and the rangers and those that are dealing with natural magic. Okay.
Yep.
Now, when you go up to the next level, what you have are 8 core magical spells. You could say there are only 8 spells really, you can say there are only 8 spells that exist in the entire magic system of Genesys.
That's a notion that exists in a lot of fantasy as well. That there are certain core spells, and everything else just stems from that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And those 8 core spell types are, of course, attack, augment, barrier, conjure, curse, dispel, heal, and utility, which is the miscellaneous. Okay, and basically, the core magic skills, some of them can be used for some of those different spell types. Okay, things like attack, for example, are very limited in terms of is unlimited in terms of Arcana, Divine, and Primal can all use it, where something like Augment can only be used by Divine and Primal, and that's sort of covered in obviously great detail within the book itself. And then when you get to the third and final level, the next level is where you can actually, scratch the earlier statement and say, okay, now there's really an infinite number of quote unquote spells out there. They just fall under each category. You can take an attack spell and then you can start tricking it out. Okay, now you can do that narratively. You can also do it mechanically. And sometimes they're one and the same. And, I can take a basic attack spell, which mechanically has an easy difficulty and works at short range on one target and deals damage equal to the characteristic of the skill, +1 per uncancelled success. And okay, that's the mechanic. And then narratively, I can say, well, it's a force bolt or a lightning strike or whatever I want. But then there's also add-ons, these sort of supplemental actions or supplemental abilities that you can, added effects that you can put onto that attack spell to really start making it unique, giving it special qualities. And in some cases, those are both narrative and mechanical, like the fire quality or the ice quality, for example, as a way to go. So as you start mixing and matching from almost this menu option, and what really gets daunting for a lot of new players is that, and there are some strategies maybe we can talk about to overcome this, that I've found, but at the very least, it's so daunting because there's you can do anything, any spell you can think of, you can craft in this system. You don't have to learn the spell. It's like you want to do it. Yeah. Okay, now that you've decided, let's figure out what the difficulty is. What recipe of additional effects are going to go with that spell type to do what you want to do, and thus how difficult it's going to be. Great, make the check.
Yep. Yeah,
and gets a bit analysis paralysis for a lot of people.
Yeah, but like anything with Genesys, and I don't think that it's just only Magic, but they do tend to sort of, want to overcomplicate the game, and they kind of forget that it's a little bit more narrative. Yeah,
no, role players never do that.
But yeah, so as far as the Magic skills go, Terrinoth introduces us to two additional ones, which are very, very thematic for Terrinoth, and that would be runes and verse. Now, runes obviously is because, the rune-bound setting is very much a part of that setting.
It's incredibly Terrinoth.
Exactly. And so they've introduced a very focused magic skill, which uses the runes themselves as the focal point. And then you have verse, because we start talking about bards.
Yes.
And, and they have a different way of doing things as well.
And it had to exist somewhere.
Exactly.
And bards in Terrinoth seems far more appealing to play than most other, like, say, 5e or whatever, because you can do so much more with verse. It's more interesting.
It's more versatile, you might say.
Could say that.
I would almost even say that a little bit for Genesys in general, because of just how, Genesys in terms of the narrative dice, it leaves a little bit more freedom to use those types of characters to have an impact in any type of situation.
Yep.
Particularly when you add magic to it, it only makes it easier.
Yep.
And it's good that the FFG have added verse and runes to Terrinoth, because it demonstrates that they're not afraid to add on to magic later on down the track. It also opens the gates to people making their own system to, here's your magic system out of Genesys. Feel free to add to it with your own types of magic and stuff like that, which is cool.
Yeah. Because each one of the skills can cast a certain number of those of the spell actions. So if, as Chris mentioned before, that you'll have an attack spell, but that can only be done if you're using certain skills. And like when I looked at doing a superhero setting, what I was looking at is having 6 different skills, which each one of them is a different name. It doesn't have like Arcana or whatever else. It uses each one of those as one of the name of the Infinity Stones. because I really wanted to do a Marvel sort of setting. So you can take it in any sort of direction, but if we're talking about basics. So, and I don't want to overcomplicate and confuse everyone. So we've covered the skills, and we know that they're skills, and we know that they're actions. Okay.
Yeah, and so each of those actions, though, are tied to specific skills.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so from a Magic 101 perspective, which is what I think we want to be able to have the listeners provided with, let's go through each of the skills and what magic actions each skill can give the user of that skill the ability to be able to cast.
As a person who doesn't know the rules, and if I'm listening to this, I would appreciate that.
Yeah,
sure. Well, okay, so here, okay, let's start with the basic, which is what everyone really wants to do when they think about magic, which is an attack, right?
Mm-hmm. Magic missile is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Right, exactly. But what's interesting is at least in terms of the attack action, it's one of the more versatile in the fact that all three core magic skills can be used for an attack.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You can use Arcana, Divine, and Primal. And, narratively speaking, it could be a magic missile, or in terms of Arcana, you could describe it that way. It could be a holy pillar of fire coming from the heavens for Divine, or for Primal, something like a bolt of lightning, or even something narrative like constricting thorny vines that erupt from the ground to slash at your target.
The land itself,
a flock of spectral ravens.
Yeah, a flock of ravens. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you start getting into the other actions, though, it starts to make a lot more sense, especially when you think in terms of traditional magical fantasy. Augment is next, and interestingly, Augment is not a skill that Arcana can be used with, only Divine and Primal. So when you're trying to enhance someone else, it's a buffing action. That's what you're going to do. You're going to buff them. And by the way, the core Augment action is the boss. It is absolutely amazing. Yep. 2 purple average difficulty, and you can... whoever you enhance, whoever you augment, they just add a green die to any dice pool they make while the spell's active. If you get into Terrinoth 2, runes and verse are also skills for attack. They're totally allowed.
Well, actually, verse isn't. Verse won't allow you to use attack.
Excuse me, I misread the table.
It's all good.
It's the only one.
Which makes sense. Bardic magic is not typically an attack-based magic school, right?
It's a buffing.
It is a buffing. And obviously... thus, verse is allowed for augment, and so are runes. Whereas, at least in the system, Arcana is not.
Yep.
Now, getting into barrier, which is about protection. Mm-hmm. You get in. Obviously, that's a domain of classical divine magic, but also arcane magic with Dungeons and Dragons spells like Mage Armor, which are so iconic. So Arcana and Divine are of course allowed. Runes are. Verse is not. From Terrinoth. Yep. And of course, from the core rules, Primal is also not allowed for barrier.
Which kind of begs the question when you look at like Armor of Thorns. Is it Armor of Thorns or something like that?
Barkskin from D&D?
Yeah, from D&D. That you do start sort of going, well, why aren't they included?
I could point to every single one of these 8 magical spell types and give you an example in D&D or some other setting where you have a bard or a druid or a priest or a cleric or somebody doing that thing through some random spell.
Yeah.
There was clearly, and I don't disagree, there was clearly a lot of concession made here because this is so freeform.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that you have to mechanically separate out what these skills can do that others cannot. And thus, correspondingly, what certain careers can do better that others cannot. Okay, in terms of who has better access to those skills and who can put more XP into them.
Yep.
Otherwise, what's the point of having different skills at all at that point? It's just, okay, there's just one skill for magic. Yeah. And guys, I tried that. I actually did some homebrew playtesting with just one magic skill.
Yep.
It sucked.
Yeah.
Because everything just seems the same.
Why did it suck? What was it about that didn't work out?
First of all, it became an uber skill.
Yep.
Okay, it was very clear that everyone is just going to become a magic user, and all my players were like, "Yep, we're all just going to become magic users now." After one session, that was it because it was so stinking powerful.
Yeah.
And additionally, when we tried to have like separate careers that still had one magic skill, it gave the players no agency.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that it's like, listen, this is your character type. This is what you do well. When you simplify magic to that degree, you take that distinction away. It's like
it's kind of like when they divvy up the knowledge skills into all the different facets of what's knowledge. So it's not just like, oh, you have knowledge and you can know, you just put all your skills into knowledge so that you happen to know everything and like you're Mr. Universe. It's actually allowing you to actually have different focuses based on what your character is going to be good at versus just being magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
But see,
Absolutely.
it's not only that as well. Something that I've looked at, because that was one of the things that I've always sort of said, well, if I wanted to run Pathfinder using this system, how do I do that? And there's a talent that allows you to learn another magic skill.
Yep.
So there's nothing wrong with saying, because let's face it, druids, they are a divine caster of swords, that they can basically take that talent so that they can change over. Yes, they've got to use a different skill, but there's still the ability to be able to do that.
They're still
You've
able
just
to
got
cast that bark skin if they want to.
That's right.
Well, and to be perfectly honest, this is Genesys. I'm sorry, a warrior can take any of the magic skills.
Absolutely, but they're going to be
just
as good as that.
It's expensive.
Yeah, that's how you get a paladin. I mean, let's face it. So you put that on, and that was in the Genesys playtest, or not the playtest. The what do they call it? The live play that we did.
Yeah,
Alice Rain also had that talent
you're
as well.
Talking about where you can cast one spell per turn,
correct,
per encounter.
Yeah, which is a divine spell.
Yeah.
So it's possible.
But to add something, so going back to the skills and what actions you can take with them, if you're playing a game and your setting you really want druids to be able to cast that protection spell, you can adjust that if you want to. There's nothing that's stopping you.
Yeah.
But just remember that you've got to keep the balance.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got to keep the balance. You just absolutely have to. I mean, I've in my early playtest too, it's like, again, this is the yes and system, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I have a player that wants to do that and wants to get really crazy with it, it's like, okay, sure, you can do it, but you know what? It's going to cost you more strain, or the difficulty is going to be a lot higher than it normally would be.
Yep.
But I mean,
or maybe you got to flip a story point to pull it off.
And really, if you're a druid anyway, there's other ways of achieving a similar result. Like maybe augment your brawn. To get more soak.
Yeah, I mean, see, that was another thing that one of the questions that we got asked a couple of episodes ago, where we were talking about, a barrier in the form of a flaming wall. And everybody's going, how could you do this? And it's like, yeah, but what happens if you summon it? So sometimes it's a little bit different. So you would use conjure as opposed to a barrier. So it's just a matter of thinking outside the box. And this is what Terrinoth is all about, sort of looking at things from a different perspective to get the same results.
So, okay, we've talked about attack, augment, and barrier.
Yep.
Okay. Now, you talked about summoning. Okay. The next big magical action is conjure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, what's really interesting is that the Terrinoth skills don't apply at all. The only magic skills, whether it's core rulebook or Terrinoth, that apply for conjure are Arcana or Primal. That's it. All right. And obviously, summoning, out of thin air something. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a creature. It can be an object as well, which is something that's really interesting.
Like a wall.
And if it is a creature,
wall.
obviously, when you get into druidic magic, there's a huge tradition of being able to summon animals to fight for you. But that's conjure, okay? Summoning objects or creatures, temporarily. Then we get to the opposite of augment, which is with augment is about buffing. Cursing is about debuffing.
Yep.
And a lot of skills have access to curse. Every one of the magic skills, every single one, except for primal, has access to curse.
Yep.
And this is about debuffing. And literally the core power, whereas augment is, hey, add a green die to your pools. Cursing is, hey, guess what? You add a purple die to your pools. That's the core ability at least.
Yep.
Then we have one of the really unusual ones that, interestingly enough, my players had some of the hardest time with in play, which is Dispel.
Right.
It's very much a catch-all that applies to a lot of magical disciplines. But it's literally just about removing active spell effects that are in play. That's what it is. And the only skills that have access to it are Arcana from the core rulebook, and then obviously Bardic characters in terms of verse have access to it in Terrinoth.
Yeah.
The last two, we have Heal. From the core book standpoint, that is Divine and Primal skill, which again fits very traditionally with the archetypes of magic in fantasy settings. And of course in Terrinoth, Verse, Bardic magic also has access to it as well.
Yep.
And then there's Utility. And Utility, maybe we can spend time later talking about Utility because it's one of the most misunderstood spell types that are out there because it is unlimited and extremely limited at the same time.
Yep.
And all magic skills can do utility. It's just the utility box. Anything that you can't normally do with any of the other 7 spell types, that's what you use utility for.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a cantrip. Sort of the type of level of power and what you can do with it.
Yeah.
I really like that as a spell, or the utility spell, because it enables you to do things in-game which just fill the blanks as you're playing, I guess you could say.
Yep.
I know when we were doing the Terrinoth recording for the live play, the first one we did, my character needed the lantern when they're in the sewers. And I just said there's a holy light emanates from the head of my mace.
Yep.
And just use utility spell to do that.
Yeah.
Bam, done.
And it's a small thing, but I felt that added a whole lot to the scene.
Yeah.
Because I could have just described it as a lantern,
Yep.
but I described it as a holy light emanating from the head of my lantern,
Yep.
head of my mace, and that immediately paints a much more vivid picture of what that spell is.
Yeah, exactly.
Associated to that character, which I love. Love
And
utility.
that character as well.
Exactly.
It paints a picture of not only what your character can do, but what your character believes in, how it works, how it uses what it uses in order to get to, because it was a paladin, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so in the darkness of the tunnels and using its divine light to guide its way in order to smite whatever it needed to be smote, it was really cool.
Smoten.
Okay, so let's summarize what we've talked about thus far. We have 3 different magic skills, namely Arcana, Divine, and Primal. Now, this comes from the Genesys core rulebook. And then we have Realms of Terrinoth, which provides us with 2 other magic skills, namely Runes and Verse. Characters equipped with these skills can then cast a number of spell actions. Specifically, those are Attack, Augment, Barrier, Conjure, Curse, Dispel, Heal, and Utility. Now, we've just talked about all of those, just briefly. Now, on page 115 of the Realms of Terrinoth book, we've been kindly provided with a list of a quick reference chart, which has a list of what skills can cast what actions. Now, this is very, very helpful. So definitely recommend going and getting that book if you haven't done so already. Now, so let's look at what each of the skills can do, or what each of the actions, can do individually, and explain to the listeners what each of these actions actually do and how they work. Because when you look at the core rules, it will have each one of the actions can do certain things. It has a base ability, and then it can be enhanced, for want of a better term, modified. And that's normally done through increasing the difficulty. We'll start with attack, because obviously attack's the most.
Well, attack is what most people want to do.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the most useful in a combat fantasy setting, any sort of setting really, because combat's a big thing. So when we're talking about an attack action, an attack action starts off with an easy difficulty. And then it's modified. It's kind of like just using a weapon, really, with a few additional things on top. So range is a big thing, which obviously increases or decreases. And, you can add on, as Chris mentioned before, you can add on fire types or electricity or a whole heap of different things.
Well, as an example, with range, there's really two things you can do there.
Yep.
Because your basic attack action starts at a range of short.
Yep.
You can only attack things at a range of short.
Only.
If they are engaged
That's the
with
point.
you,
Only. Yeah.
If they're engaged with you, you can't attack them with that spell. If they're further out, if they're medium or further, you can't hit them. You need to modify the spell, which will increase your difficulty with either the close combat or the range modifier.
Yep. Because there's a close combat
which makes
specific difficulty, which increases it by 1.
Which is like your shocking grasp type spell.
Yeah.
You're imbuing it on your hand and then you hit them.
Yep, exactly.
Now, what's interesting, and as a note to this, in Terrinoth specifically, I don't know if we're going to get to magical implements in this discussion,
Right.
but they actually have an implement that's basically a magic club that exists to be able to cast attack spells without increasing the difficulty for close combat.
I think we will get into magical implements because they are a big part of how magic works.
Sure.
Because if you don't have magic implements, magic can get a bit crazy in the difficulty.
Yeah.
And it does not come anywhere par to a person with a regular weapon.
Sure.
I'm no expert on Harry Potter, but isn't Harry Potter aren't
It's
there
the epitome
wands?
of that,
There are
really.
wands.
Yeah,
Wands, okay.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I'm a Harry Potter expert, I swear.
So, Chris, how did you do the wands thing with regards to an attack spell, for example?
So I borrowed a lot and took a little bit of a left turn. In Harry Potter, at least, any implements you see outside of a wand are purely narrative. So really, I ditched all implements except for wands. And to a lesser extent, and keep in mind, I wrote this before Terrinoth had come out, so I hadn't seen Terrinoth.
Yep.
You know how for the implements in Terrinoth, you can actually craft them with certain materials that provide certain benefits?
Yep.
I worked the same thing into Harry Potter, and so every PC gets a wand, and either randomly or intentionally they can choose what the wand is made of from what wand wood it is, and then also what the core is. And both of those things granted static or active benefits to the character. Sometimes it'd be once a session, sometimes continuously if they're smaller benefits that would affect either magic or other skill checks. Additionally, the wand would also appropriately modify the damage of an attack spell, which is obviously very common for the majority of implements in the core rules.
That's pretty cool.
So with the attack action, you're using the magic skill that you are casting the spell with to make the attack, and the base damage is the attribute associated with the skill being used to cast a spell. So Arcana is intellect, Divine is power, Divine is willpower, Primal is cunning, and in Realms of Terrinoth, Runes is intellect.
But there is a modifier that adds a skill as damage as well, isn't it?
In terms of additional effect,
Yeah.
empowered.
That's
right.
Yeah, I knew there was one.
That's right. There is one. It's empowered. That's correct. I always forget about that one because no one ever does it because it's very expensive.
But it's the best one.
Empowered. You increase. That's right. You increase the difficulty by 2.
Yep.
And it actually deals. It's even then not the skill. It deals damage equal to twice the characteristic.
That's right.
To
Yeah.
the skill. Now, obviously, the higher skill you have, though, the better pool you're going to have, and.
Yep.
And again, this comes down to the beauty of these mechanics. Like I don't want to see the skill ranks linked to damage because your skill ranks determine your dice pool, and the dice pool is already linked to damage.
Exactly.
Because you get +1 damage for each uncancelled success.
That's right.
So if you started double dipping into that character resource, that would be a little imbalanced.
It'd make it more worth way more. But noting that the difficulty with when you're just doing the magic attack action is it starts as a easy check.
Yep, easy check. 1 purple die. Very good. Michael, you had a question.
Yeah, again, related to magic and the difficulty, because obviously your difficulty can ramp up very quickly depending on what things you stack onto your spell.
Yep.
So your spell can quite quickly become an impossible task. Right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it might state differently in the magic section.
Yep.
But an impossible task is usually 6 or more difficulty dice. And to do an impossible task, you have to then spend a story point, and which sets the difficulty to 5 purple dice.
Yep.
So if I, for example, max out a spell with 8 difficulty dice, does it become an impossible task where I have to spend a story point to cast that spell, but the difficulty then retracts back down to 5 difficulty dice?
There is an easy answer to your question.
Yep.
The magic rules state very specifically that you can never add effects that would increase a spell's difficulty beyond formidable.
There you go.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why magic implements are so amazing.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so it is a natural limiter to the magic rules as they are.
Yeah, it's
that
sort
you
of like
can't go over that mark.
you can only channel so much raw power through you as the implement.
Yeah,
Once
exactly.
you start involving other things,
Honestly, if in certain campaigns, I would, if a spell did somehow get beyond that level, I would start, instead of increasing difficulty, start upgrading.
Yeah, yeah.
And watch them roll to spares, then the raw energies of the arcane tear them
blow
apart.
yourself up.
That'd be fun.
Yep.
Or we're playing a Dark Heresy setting and channeling the
exactly.
warp.
That is what
wow.
I'm thinking of. Psychers and things like
Yes.
that. I can see that being a very
Enjoy your demonic incursion.
Oh, and let's talk about for a sec if you get into the basically the table, and in the core rulebook it's actually on page 211.
Yep.
Where spending threat and despair on magic checks.
Yes.
When you compare that to spending threat and despair on like combat actions, it's horrific.
Absolutely, especially when you like the very, very first one, threat. Magical energies exhaust the character, and they suffer 2 strain per threat, or one wound.
Or one
the
wound.
player's choice.
Oh my god!
which you can't soak. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. There is no soak in that, baby.
So
I think a potent, this advantage and threat chart is having a potent is very, very important for Magic.
Absolutely.
Because it makes players think twice about using the magic every 5 seconds, and it really encourages the GM to go off table and create some really cool things that can happen to PCs on the fly.
because you know it's going to be big.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever it is. But the thing that we haven't mentioned
Yes.
is that whenever you're trying to cast a spell, you need to spend 2 strain,
That is true.
which is a big limiter, especially when you're talking about what kind of effects the threat have on
Yep.
you and the strain that causes. Casting magic is exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing as well is that, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more about how it's applied, but when you cast a magic, you obviously, as you mentioned, you take your 2 points of strain. But then if you think, I'll get plenty of advantages to recover that strain. No, you won't, because that's what you use to power the abilities that you're giving the spell.
Yeah.
If you're not using the advantages to do that, then why are you bothering upping the spell to add those effects?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could spend them to get strain back, but that's not going to be that. Yeah.
It's irrelevant. You're just chasing your own tail, essentially.
Yeah.
That's right.
That innate conflict between those two things actually is the root mechanical cause that answers one of our Facebook questions that we got from Jack Jello, which I know we'll get to.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we've taken a look at the attack action. So let's look at the next one. And as Chris rightly mentioned before, the augment action is amazing. And it can do all sorts of things. So let's go through that. So effectively, it has an initial difficulty of 2 purple die. But then what does it do for its base?
The base is you select 1 engaged target, which could be yourself.
Yep.
2 purple difficulty average difficulty. And when you cast the spell, until the end of your next turn, the target adds a green die to all of their checks.
Yep.
And that cannot be stacked. But that's the base.
Yeah.
And so honestly, if you maintain that, and this may be a good time to talk about that because we haven't talked about that either. We said it costs 2 strain to cast a spell. But if you look at these spells, with the exception of the instantaneous ones like attack, almost all of them last until pretty much the end of your next turn. That's it. Okay, that doesn't seem like very long, but many of these spell types you can concentrate on. Okay, which means they can actually be maintained round to round to round to round, and you concentrate and maintain it by sacrificing one of your maneuvers.
Yep.
However, it does not cost additional strain to do that.
No,
it's only the initial strain cost.
When we talked about attack, we didn't really go through all of the different additional effects that you can apply to it, because attack's pretty straightforward. It's very straightforward. You deal damage, you get the extra equipment qualities basically that most weapons get, and you can add those on. But augment's a bit different. As you say, it gives you that extra dice to roll into your pool, and you can do some cool stuff there. But there's specific additional effects here that can only be applied depending on which magical skill you're using. For instance, there's Divine Health, and that can only be used by Divine. It'll increase the difficulty of the skill check by 1 purple, but when you succeed at this, you increase your wound threshold by a value equal to the character's ranks in knowledge for the duration of the spell, which is that's pretty significant buff in health.
Yeah,
that's very significant actually. And it all does things like that. If you want and you're really good at magic, you can add additional target as well, and then try and hit the entire party with that for the one action.
Yep. Yeah. So again, it's using advantages to basically sort of add things and add effects to it. So
exactly.
Yeah. And this is the key to. I guess it's the second most important key when looking at casting any sort of spell, is that advantages are your friend. When it comes to when it comes to damage, I guess successes are your friend. But to add all those additional things like blast and whatever else, you're still going to need advantages. So, yeah.
So what's interesting is that, with the exception of attack, with a few exceptions, most of the additional effects that you add to things like barrier or augment or curse or dispel are actually not advantage driven.
No.
You kind of you do it and you do it and you do it. I mean that's pretty much it. But this is where the GM's creativity has to come in terms of how you can then supply cool benefits for advantage. Like getting an extra effect, or maybe affecting an extra ally, things that you maybe had never even planned on in terms of adding additional effects.
Well, additional target is specifically driven from advantages.
Yes. That's like I said, but that's like the only one.
That's
for
the
augment.
only one. Yeah.
And so, like when you get to attack, like 90% of the additional effects are advantage driven. There's 1 for augment. There is 1 for barrier. There is, I think, 1, maybe 2 for conjure. Okay, that are advantage driven.
I think this is a really good thing though, because when you're talking about blasting someone from the sky, you don't want that to be easy. You want to have lots of things for that to be, for your dice to be spent on for that.
Yes,
because it's a one-trick pony. It does one thing, but these other things, especially when you're casting a spell that has a very narrative flavor to what it's doing, having those advantages free to add narrative effects and help you describe how this is happening, I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing that I know that other people have asked, and I know that I've asked myself though, is that in D&D, for example, or Pathfinder, that you have like demons and things like that, which can only be affected by certain types of magic.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you, without going extreme as far as like, let's say that you wanted to do an attack spell, but you wanted to give it, we'll say, the acid quality, but you don't want to give it any more additional effects as such. You just want that to affect, to be like an acid attack without it having any additional qualities.
You just want to change the flavor of the spell to make it that you're casting acid at them without giving it the acid additional effects.
That's right. So that if you wanted to, as a GM, you wanted to craft your own demon that has those sorts of resistances.
Yeah. How
would you go about doing that?
Well, no, like from my perspective, I've actually had to deal with something similar.
Yep.
The distinction is between narrative and mechanical.
Yep.
Look, the one purple die is just stupid easy. Okay, it's intended to be.
Yep.
If my player wants to describe that basic magical attack as a splash of acid or a shock of electricity or a spray of fire from their hands, it's all fluff. I don't care. If you actually want the fire to catch something on fire, if you actually want that acid to ignore armor, if you actually want that fire to be powerful enough to overcome the damage resistance of an ice demon, for example. Okay, if you want a mechanical benefit for that flavor, you best be upgrading. You best be increasing your difficulty.
Right.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
That's where I draw the line.
Yeah, because even if you don't spend your advantages to pump the effect, you've still gained a mechanical benefit out of doing this.
Exactly.
Because is there, I mean, and I don't know whether this question has been asked before, but is there an opportunity to have a play? Because I'm always looking for ways to use setback die. Because you can't use Nakfred, for example, with
magic skills.
That's
important to know.
That is important to know. That you can't use it for that. So is there an opportunity, if you're wanting to put small effects in there rather than massive effects, that you can add setback die as opposed to increasing the difficulty?
Generally, I wouldn't.
Okay,
but that's where I'm saying. I was saying before. That's where advantages come in. If you're wanting to add something that doesn't really gain you a mechanical benefit, but it's purely description based, did you get enough advantage to do it?
Yep, that makes sense.
And that means as well that you're not spending advantages on other things like increasing the effects of the spell that you've just done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
Setback dice are about environmental and circumstantial problems.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And if you go to if you for reference, if you go to the table on page 210, I mean, where they talk about adding setback dice when you're casting spells, it's about you don't have free hands, you're gagged, you're wearing heavy armor, you're constricted. I mean, they're all circumstantial, environmental.
Exactly. Yep. Makes perfect sense to me. Cool.
So far, as we've been talking, and this is another common problem I see with players and writers in some sense who are doing this. I encountered this myself, and I kind of had to train myself to get away from this. There are 2 sections for each of these spell types.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
All right. And it is very important that you consider both sections, because most of what we talked about, like with attack, and basically these 2 sections are, non-structured encounter uses, structured encounter uses.
Yep.
Those are the 2 sections.
Yep.
Okay. When you're in initiative or when you're not. Okay. And when you're in initiative, boom, here's the mechanical benefits. Here you go. Here's what you can do. Like with attack, literally the non-structural attack, it's like literally the book says, go look at the structural go look at the structured encounter piece. Okay.
Yep.
That's literally what it says. But when you get into augment in some of the non-structural things you can do, I mean, this list for augment is cool, but it seems very restrictive. And it's like when you get into the non-structured view of augment, it's stuff. I mean, that's where you get into stuff like anything that's going to enhance somebody. I want to give a character flight.
Yep.
Okay. I want to give them super thick skin or increase their soak. Right. I mean, well, there's ways to do that in structured, but I want to increase one of their characteristics. Okay. Yep. I want to bump their int. By 1. For a couple rounds, something like that. These are all narrative, and so much is incumbent upon the GM to, when the player describes what they want to do, you got to figure out what spell type that is, and then you use the base difficulties plus the additional effects that are there in the structured encounter side to sort of help you gauge what your difficulty is going to be for what they're saying.
Yep.
Okay. Like if somebody wants to fly, I'm sorry, that's really boss. I mean, that's like a 4 purple difficulty. That's right there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
As an example, so just talk about it now. Take a look at both sections. Go back and forth. Think about what that is. Yeah. That's all I wanted to say on augment.
Because that is something that gets mentioned quite a lot. Is the whole, well, how do I make someone fly? Because I mean, from a D&D perspective, it's only a 3rd level spell. How do I make that happen? And because it kind of takes the encounters to another level once you start literally when you start being able to fly. It's a very, very powerful thing. So it should not be easy to do.
Well, however, in D&D, when you start flying, You're not taking strain every turn. You're
That
not
is true.
rolling threats where, you could fly, but all of a sudden, you can't fly because you've got that despair halfway during your flight or something like that.
Yep.
D&D, as it is a very binary system. You get the spell off or you don't get the spell off. In this one, you can get the spell off, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
And I think this game has enough natural limiters in the shape of its threats and strain and etc. Almost said strife then, thanks to L5R last night. Rewiring my brain already. However, I think that's where the key difference is. In this game, you can fly, but ...
Yeah.
There's going to be additional costs and effects to it. And unless you're a very potent spellcaster, flying is going to be fairly taxing for you if you're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not guaranteed to work. You could just fail and then...
But I mean, when, for example, with Fly, you cast it, there is a cost involved, and that as long as you're spending that maneuver, it just limits to what you can also do. Like, there's none of this cast Fly on you and you're going up into the air and start casting spells. I mean, you can, but it's going to be an extra 2 points.
But to move, so say you do cast a spell, say it's a utility spell to levitate,
right?
And you want to move and move around the board whilst flying and maintaining the spell.
Yep.
It's going to cost you still 2 strain every round to do the extra maneuver to go somewhere.
Yeah, true.
It's taxing as all hell.
And if you really wanted to, and if flying became a big thing, if you're the GM and you felt your players are trying to abuse that, for example, flying.
Yep.
Sure, you can levitate, but how good are you at flying? Like, I'm sure the technique of actually moving from point A to point B would be quite difficult. So the GM may even just ask for a straight athletics check or coordination check. And I guarantee most wizards who have pumped their stats into their int or whatever their casting
totally
stat
forgotten
is.
that.
They've got nothing athletics. Like, great, you fly, but you don't fly well. You land in the middle of that mob of orcs you're trying to get away from. So it's not guaranteed to work just because you are flying.
Yeah, true.
Absolutely. And let's not forget bad dice rolls as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if going back to that suggested threat and despair table, look, you roll a despair. The number one thing up there is, guess what? You lose all connection to magical capabilities for the rest of the encounter. You're burnt out. Can you imagine if that happened when you're in the air?
Sky.
Oh no! Wow, that's sort of, oh my god, I can see my house
amazing.
from here. Anyway, so yes,
And just a super quick question. When we were talking before about doing attack spells and doing magic in general, and how implements can allow you to focus that energy into something that doesn't absorb it out of you, could that be same like when we're talking about, like, if we're going to go Harry Potter, when we're talking about brooms and broomsticks flying and all that kind of stuff? Is there actually implements for every facet of magic within the system?
Sort of. The not by spell type. So you won't find an implement for augment or barrier or attack. Implements are skill focused instead. Okay. So it's like, you know what? You got this implement. Any divine, any additional effect you add with the divine descriptor, you don't increase the difficulty.
yeah,
Okay. That's it. Okay. And obviously, stuff like that. In Harry Potter, the way I handled brooms was I didn't make them implements at all, because I kind of had an easy out, because in Harry Potter there is very specific canon that says no spell has ever been devised that allows a wizard or witch to fly without the use of an object.
right.
Okay,
Well, there's one.
and so honestly, it was a lot of fun. I got to make brooms as vehicles, which was
Right.
That's a good way around that.
Yeah, and then you can bring in, because you have different models, and some of them are old, and some of them are new, and some of them are janky. So you could bring in handling,
Which
and you
is
get
awesome.
to bring in, some of them have different armor, and they're sturdier and hardier. Some of them are faster. It was a lot of fun.
But yeah, there is one person that can fly in Harry Potter, and that's Voldemort.
That's right.
That is true. But he's an NPC, and
that's it. And you can
he's
say
got an
whatever you
additional
wanna do.
stat that- so he's got a special ability that NPCs can do whatever they want. So yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Also, one quick thing before we move on.
Yes.
Speaking about additional effects on spells and how they increase your difficulty on casting the spell,
Yeah.
you have to declare it before you cast, and etc. to define that difficulty.
Yeah.
Now, this could be stated, and this could be down to my somewhat ignorance of the magic rules.
Yep.
But if I'm rolling my spell check and I say get a triumph, could I add a effect which I didn't state to that spell? Would that
Totally.
be suitable measure for spells?
I would let you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the Triumph can pretty much you have narrative control.
Cool.
So absolutely you could. And I mean this is again sort of for whatever reason, and it's up to the player or the GM or whoever is at the table to make those sort of suggestions as to why that's coming.
Well, I'm picturing a scene too where there's like a spellcaster and he's holding off. There's someone fleeing. With something vital to the party, and the spellcaster's pinned down, he can't pursue for whatever reason, and the target's just out of reach for his normal spell, so he can't increase the range band and effectively cast the spell because it's too difficult. So the player just goes, well, okay, I'm just going to roll it, get that triumph, and then use an additional effect to increase the spell range by one further on the fly, and just pray for that triumph to come up and get that spell off in a real last moment heroic sort of way.
Yeah, not a great way of doing it, but if you're in a bind, try and do it anyway.
If you're a lucky person and you're rolling 3 yellow dice, it's not a terrible chance of being a triumph.
AKA anyone but me rolling.
Or Mike.
I've rolled triumph for a very long time. Very long time.
Now, just to also touch on implements again, I'm not sure exactly what you said there about implements, Chris, but the one thing to note with implements is they're not tied to an action specifically. They have an additional effect that they normally add to the spell without increasing the difficulty, but as long as that spell has that as an additional effect, you can use this implement for it, which is very strong.
Cool.
Just wanted to make just to add that.
Absolutely. All right, so augment. Have we discussed pretty much everything there is to know about augment, do you think?
In broad terms?
In broad terms?
With many detours along the way. But I think they're important detours because they are tidbits of information that sort of come up.
Well,
questions
that raise.
As we always say in all of these segments that we do, our listeners know how to read. And if they really want to get into Magic, give it a good long look. We'll give you some sort of hints and tips along the way.
The Magic rules, I think, are very easy to sort of go, oh, that's a lot of text, and skim over. You quickly breeze through it, and you think, oh, well, I can only cast 2 or 3 types of spells, and you don't dive that deep into it. And if you're used to D&D or other similar games, we open the Magic section, there's literally quarter of the book dedicated to spells, you immediately your reaction is to think our spells are super limited in Genesys, whilst it's a complete opposite. It's a the game's fantastically designed that doesn't need pages and pages and pages of rules to give you near unlimited spells, and that is powerful. I
mean, if you wanted to as a GM, you could go and you could go through every single spell that is in the Pathfinder rulebook and write up each spell, and then you go and, like, if a player says, so what spells can I cast? All of them. It's just that you've got to make the difficulty that I've listed there for each one of those spells. And you watch their minds sort of change a little bit and go, oh, because that's all that you're really doing. And I mean, we'll talk about this later on how you can run as a new player, how you can run a game, a few little tips and tricks. That you can write up a spell. If there's something that you are often doing that you wanted to have your firebolt and you wanted to do that all the time, you can say, right, well, this is the difficulty.
There's a talent for that.
There is.
What I think GM Hooly is saying, not so much in game terms, but from a mechanical sense, so you have it on paper in front of you, so you don't have to look at the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
And formulate it every single time you try and cast a spell.
If you're new to this,
honestly, even if you're a veteran player and there's one combo of one type of spell you're always doing, like an augment, because you have a tank in the party and this particular augment works really, really well on your tank because you've done it a few times. Instead of having to reference each step of that in the process in the book, write it down. This adds this adds this adds this to create this. Print it on a little card and stick it in a card sleeve and keep it with your character sheet.
And all I meant, was that if that is something that you're doing a lot of, and you've got this permanent copy for your spell, and you use that every game session, every encounter, there is a signature spell talent which is going to reduce the difficulty on that spell and make it even more potent for you.
Absolutely.
So in fact, there is a talent in the game which solidifies a spell that you've created into
Exactly.
a spell. That's cool.
So it is worth noting that talent is only available in the runebound setting.
That's
Yes,
right.
that is correct. That is correct. But if you're like anyone who buys any of these books, you can pull from anywhere. And, you know,
Yes, you can.
I mean, as we've said in the past, Chris, there's obviously the full... there's a PDF which is available. Somebody's done all of the Star Wars talents and put them into the one document. Although we have found that some of them aren't necessarily translates real well at all.
While they translate well, they just become very, very broken very quickly. As my
you got
Got to be careful.
as my Stars of Outnumber character proved with her revolver that could just destroy with the world.
It was what was the name of that revolver
It
again?
was a Godhammer revolver. It wasn't the revolver that was doing the damage. It was the fact that she had a combination of all the gambler talents, plus all these true aim sort of talents.
Right.
And it made her gun doing 20 damage a shot with 12 advantages every single time.
Yeah.
It just got dumb.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you have all the talents just willy-nilly floating about in space, because with no limiter, it just becomes very silly
they
very quickly.
clearly have not necessarily been playtested the way that, you know.
Exactly.
I mean,
It's a
there
fair
is a reason
resource.
why
Well, it's
they're
fair,
positioned in the tree and on a tree in Star Wars as opposed.
And
So-
why you can have certain things readily available in the world, but they're restricted access, so not everyone gets them.
Yep, exactly. All right. So we've talked about Augment. Let's talk about Barrier, because I think Barrier is fun.
Barrier is a cool spell.
Barrier.
It is.
Barrier is cool.
So Barrier basically is just an easy check, and if the check is successful, until the end of the character's next turn, you reduce the damage of all hits the target suffers by 1 and further reduce it by 1 for every uncancelled 2 successes beyond the first. But that's just the start, and there's a lot more that you can do. Mm-hmm. Martin, would you like to take us through some of the stuff that you can do with a barrier spell?
Well, you can increase your defense for 1 by your knowledge ranks, which I think is very cool.
That is cool.
I mean, you get capped at 4, I think it is, for defense, but that's still a lot of extra defense that you can add to yourself just by simply increasing it by 2 difficulty, I believe it is. And you can empower it as well, which means that you're going to reduce damage to you equal to the number of uncancelled successes instead of, I think it's 2 uncancelled successes on the basic thing. So that makes it a lot more powerful again.
Yeah.
So you can make a barrier that is ridiculous in strength, but it's going to be really difficult to cast, which means you're going to get less successes anyway, unless you're really good at this.
Yeah.
But you can also, increase your range of the spell, and you can target extra people. But the one thing that really, that I really like, if you're an Arcana spellcaster, you can reflect spells that are cast at you on your enemy, which I think is really cool. It costs 2 difficulty, and
2 additional difficulty.
2 additional
on top.
difficulty, and then any spell that an opponent casts at you on a magic attack, if it generates 3 threat or a despair, after the check is resolved, they suffer a hit dealing damage equal to the total damage of that attack. So
It's like Supreme Reflect from Star Wars.
Yep, except because it's after the check is resolved, you still get hit by it, but they
Right.
also get hit by it.
Wow.
Unless I'm reading that wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, no, you get hit, they get hit as well. But
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, if your effect is high enough, you could potentially take no damage.
You could.
Yeah, exactly. So there's also...
It's interesting. It's interesting. You think Reflection is awesome. I think Sanctuary is awesome.
It's a kind of mind.
Which is, and I'm the guy who likes playing clerics in D&D, so this is all about me. But it's like, it's kind of like it's again a 2 purple add-on that's divine only, where per the GM's discretion, characters that are the antithesis of your faith or their deity, they automatically disengage from the affected target, and they cannot re-engage with them for the duration of the spell.
Wow.
Yeah, so they can still shoot you or things like
Yes.
that, but they can't hit you with a melee weapon, which is really nice.
but just that like holy light or energy pouring from you that people that are antithetical to your faith are like no, I just that's totally awesome.
That's really a turn undead spell in a way.
Yeah,
in a way, it very much is. And what's interesting is like. So we've only talked about the structured encounter stuff. When you get into non-structured encounter uses for barrier, this is where you get into the really interesting. It's anything to do with protection, and they actually call out very specific things in there to really get your brain going. You want to breathe underwater? That's a barrier spell.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Or an
protection
spell.
from elements or fire or ice specifically.
Yep.
That's a barrier spell.
Yep.
And you need to have the freedom to make it easier. Like when I developed a similar spell when I was creating Familiar, and it was one of those things that protection from fire. Okay, that's it. It's a barrier spell, but it only protects you from fire damage and only fire damage. And so in that instance, it was like, okay, the base difficulty is the same, but if you're successful, you ignore fire damage and how much damage? Well, equal to the characteristic of the skill being used, plus each uncancelled success, kind of like an inverse attack.
Yep.
And that seems, oh God, that's powerful. Well, no, because it's just against one type of elemental damage. That's it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
But as Martin suggested, I don't know whether you heard that or not, but as Martin suggested, you can also use augment for the same sort of thing. And again, it's one of those things that you've just got to sort of, when you're talking about water breathing and stuff like that,
particularly about narrative effect.
Yeah.
If you've got a primal druid that wants to breathe underwater, he's not going to cast a barrier spell. He's going to try and maybe grow gills.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's exactly correct. And this is where it comes down to skill usage sometimes. And again, you can accomplish the same effect through these various different types. Like when for barrier spell, when it actually talks about it in the non-structural section, it says, having a bubble of air around your head so that you can breathe. Okay. And that's specifically what it says. Whereas if they said, I want to grow gills or just be able to breathe water through my lungs, that's totally primal magic at that point.
Yep.
That's right.
Real quick, I want to say something that probably is going to appeal to GM Kaitlin and anyone else who's a Mass Effect fan. But you could use this magic system in Mass Effect to represent the Omnitech that they have in Mass Effect. You want a shield, you just use an Omnitech to create a shield bubble around you.
Right.
You want to be able to breathe underwater, you use the Omnitech to create underwater gills for you using the Omnitech. You could, theoretically, plug this fantasy magic system into high sci-fi. Very, very, very easy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sufficiently
the Omnitech
advanced.
and also the
Biotech, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely, biotech, yeah.
Because all of their, if you're going to be like an Asari huntress or things like that, using those types of abilities is all very, very stock standard. Your barriers, all that kind of stuff.
That's just a different skill, isn't it?
Is within this. I think we've actually going to be talking a little bit later about how we can move magic into other different settings, going away from the stereotype of what you commonly think of magic, which is, witches, wizards, all those types of things.
But as the quote goes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
That is true.
If anyone's played Mass Effect, just going by what Martin just said then, Mass Effect is a perfect example of that. Because everything a Mass Effect character does is magic with hexes, essentially. all the abilities either glow purple from the biotech or they are a translucent neon orange, usually with hexes everywhere. And that's, apart from that, it's no different from any other magic.
And you just have two magic skills. One's biotech and one's Omnitech.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
It's biotics.
Biotics.
That was the name of it. I can't believe I completely forgot it, but biotics. So you have the Omnitech and then you have biotics being the...
I just had this image of a Krogan bearing down on someone and the dude raising his arm just in time to create a biotech or bionic, or what's it? Biotech? Biotic shield out of his wrist just in time to deflect the incoming blow from the Krogan warrior. And such a cool thing. As a sci-fi man, it's far more appealing to me talking to magic in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than fantasy, but it's all the same. Because how you dress it up.
Again, this is the reason why that I decided that I wanted to have powers as spells. Because just because it's called spells, it doesn't need to be looked at like a spell. As you say, you can just be...
People.
Oh, God.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. This framework can be reskinned into so many different things in so many different settings.
Yep. Exactly. So we've covered attack, augment, and barrier. What's next?
Conjure.
Let me conjure that up.
I see what you did there.
All right, so conjure basically, again, the difficulty for that is just an easy check. So 1 purple die. Now, if the check is successful, the character summons a simple tool with no moving parts, such as a shovel or a pickaxe, and, a one-handed melee weapon or something like that, or a minion no bigger than a silhouette 1. Now, I know that conjure gets a lot of questions when it comes to what the hell can I actually conjure when it comes to creatures. So we'll get on to that in a tick. So let's just talk about some of the things that you can do with the conjure. Chris, what can you do with conjure?
Well, you laid it out. You can summon just about anything you want, but the thing is, it's very, 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 very limited.
Yep.
Until you really have to start increasing your difficulty with additional effects in order to actually get something useful. Okay. So, like, if you want to summon a creature, regardless of what it is, great. It's a creature. It's going to act like a normal wild creature of that type, which means if it doesn't like you or it's threatened by you, it's going to maul you. Okay. Or your enemies, or you have no control. You have to increase the difficulty of the spell with the summon ally effect in order to actually have control over it, which is also one of the reasons the Druidic Circlet is a phenomenal implement. Because you don't have to do that. There's a handful of additional effects. It's going to appear next to you unless you add the range increase to it. And I had a character who didn't want to add the summon ally effect. I had one of my playtesters do this. They knew the creature was going to go crazy and just attack anything. He was actually summoning a large viper.
Right.
And this was Harry Potter, and he literally, I gave the player so much credit because he literally jumped out of his chair and screamed, "Serpent Sorcia!" and summoned a giant snake. Okay.
Right.
Which is how you're supposed to role play.
That's a couple of boost die. That's a couple of boost die for sure.
All right. So he did that, and he didn't want to increase the difficulty with summon ally. So instead, what he chose to do was to increase the difficulty by 1, just to summon it directly next to the enemy, working under the assumption that the violent viper would just attack the nearest target, and it did. So there's fun you can have with it. You can increase the difficulty to summon something more complicated, or a creature that's larger, or additional summons where you can attempt to summon multiples, but that is advantage powered.
Yep.
This is where we had the question, how do you create a magical, fire, a wall of fire? And I think my personal answer was that you use conjure. The description for a base spell says that you can only create something of, a simple object with no moving parts. Sure, but you can also summon a creature. So if you're going to create fire, you summon.
You don't necessarily need to summon an elemental or something like that.
No.
It can just be a door. But it's just that it's burning.
Yeah, but if you don't add the summon ally, you've got no control over what catches on fire.
True.
But you can do this. You can create this wall of flame.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen a lot of people looking at this recently, and this is why I bring it up, where they've taken the damage from the magic attack action and say, well, if you summon this on the person, you deal this much damage. And I think that no, because you're not creating a. If you really need a damage value, that is a good way of doing it. But if with this, what you're summoning is not an attack spell. You're not directly dealing damage.
There's a difference from a burning door to directed arcane magical fire.
Yeah, but you are creating. You are summoning fire, an actual terrain piece into the room. So if someone interacts with that, ask yourself the question: if you were the DM and there was a fire on the field and someone stepped in it, how much damage is that going to deal?
Yeah.
and that's your answer.
Yeah, so it's no different from a natural fire happening to be there.
Because you've created
If
it.
I have a torch and run over to that haystack and light it up, that flame will do innate damage. Doesn't have to be magical flame to, you don't have to stress about
that's
finding a magical answer for it because it's a mundane thing that already exists.
Because that's the difference between conjure and magic attack.
Exactly.
Once you've conjured something, it's on the field. It's mundane now.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
For me, it all comes down to the effect the player is trying to accomplish.
Yes.
Okay. It's like, and where the wall of flame question gets sticky is, again, players are in this Pathfinder D&D mindset where they want to create something that not only creates a physical barrier but also damages anyone who touches it. Okay.
Yep.
And that's where you got to get creative. But you got to step back. What's the base thing you want to do? I mean, great, it's a wall of fire. It just means there's fire on the ground and they can walk through it and maybe take damage if it deals damage, or catch on fire if they walk through it? Or do you want it to be your classical wall of fire that's like practically impenetrable? There's an argument that it could be a barrier spell. Okay. If it was a wall of stone, damn sure it's a barrier spell.
Yep.
Okay. But you could also make a case for conjure. It comes down to how they're going to describe it naturally. And either way, that would be a hellishly difficult spell.
Well, it would be, especially if you're doing it as a conjure. But does maintain say you can't do that to an attack spell?
You cannot maintain an attack spell, no.
No, but in this case, if you're targeting a location and you're creating a spell that does damage equal to the attack spell, and you're calling it a wall of fire, could you not just then tell the player that they have to maintain it to keep that wall of fire in that location, and if anyone interacts with it, it deals them the damage of the attack spell?
Sure.
It costs them a maneuver each turn to do that, and if they stop maintaining it, it disappears. It's another way of doing it.
I would go one step further, frankly, because you're basically maintaining an attack spell that's not meant to be maintained round to round. I would say you could do it, and it would cost you 2 strain
to do
each round.
That's another
you
way.
maintained it.
Yep.
Absolutely. The thing is that there's not just one way to do anything. And I think that's what we've got to do, is that it's up to the player and the GM to negotiate, if we go back to what Jay Little has said numerous times on your show, Chris, that it's all about that social contract to be able to negotiate with each other. And once you've worked out what the difficulty is, that's your social contract. To go, that's what the difficulty is.
I still prefer conjure because you can use grand summon to make a giant bonfire that someone has to walk through. But that's me. Are you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, with conjuring, could I not summon, say, a fire elemental?
Yes.
Which is a little burning sprite, just sits there in the middle of the field. Then in my next turn, I maintain the conjured fire elemental.
Yep.
It sits there doing essentially nothing really because it's just a thing that I'm maintaining the spell on. However, if I do an attack spell, could I say to the GM, hey, can I increase the difficulty to make this attack from the conjured creature?
Absolutely.
Why not?
How cool would that be?
I'd let that.
So effectively, could you do that for your wall? So to say, instead of having a fire sprite, you would have your wall that you make a fire attack from.
Yeah.
You could.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say that your wall of fire hasn't been created because you've summoned a fire spirit to the spell,
Yes,
like you do in L5R.
But I mean, from a game perspective, isn't that another way to do essentially exactly the same thing that you're discussing just before?
Yeah.
And as you talk through it, I think that's actually the preferred way to do it.
Michael wins.
I mean, I'm dead serious because what you just described actually. Yeah, dude. I mean, what you're talking about is a conjure spell with grand summon, so it's 4 difficulty at that point.
Yep.
And you've just summoned a fire spirit, a fire elemental. And what shape it takes, it's a fire snake, okay, or a fire wall elemental, that's fine. It's not like that firewall's not going to deal damage to you or your allies. It is if they try to pass through it or touch it, okay?
Unless you've made it an ally.
You don't need to do summon ally. No. I think you just solved the entire conundrum right there.
Yeah.
Good job.
It actually is also one that's come up a lot in the questions that we see on the FFG forum. I think it was the Owl asked something similar, like how would you deal with that? So it's obviously something that a lot of people are trying to figure out and solve themselves. So well done, sir.
Yes. Good job, mate.
Just fresh set of eyes.
Yeah. But
So now I'm feeling all alone again and not knowing a lot about magic. I can't solve any of these problems. I'm just listening and learning mostly.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited. And you know what? If you added the additional summon effect to the conjure, so basically you're summoning 2 silhouette 3 fire elementals, you could make a massively long wall of fire.
Absolutely.
It would just be 5 purple difficulty to do.
Because this was essentially how we looked at doing it. Adding the idea of it being a fire elemental really solidifies it as being, what it can do.
Elemental is just an example. It could be that wall that happens to spit fire.
But it can.
But whatever you wanted to do. What I would do if I was a druid, I'd summon a wall of thorns, and it whips out like tendrils or vines covered with barbs, and that's its ranged attack.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing as well, talking about summoning, if you've got all of those summoned creatures, right, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got summoned creatures and then you're casting a spell and narratively, they're sort of like doing if they were doing like a Death Star type thing, so all of these little green acid creatures or whatever else, and they're all firing all at once into this one point, and you're the one that's casting the spell, can't they assist? Wouldn't that be giving you boost die for assistance?
I don't see why that
for
can't
your
work.
attack spell.
Well, I don't know. If it depends what you're summoning. If you're summoning just a thing which is a utility, that's how I would run my fire spirit. It's a utility that sits out in the field, a turret, more or less.
Sure.
It's just a turret that now enables me to cast the spell from a position that I'm not at. Which could be quite powerful. It means I can hide up in the hill while my turret is down there firing the orcs. So I'm just channeling my range.
Or even if it's to use the example of a wall of thorns, you're hiding behind the wall of thorns. They've got to beat their way through that wall of thorns before they can attack you, while you can attack them.
But going by what you're saying, GM Hooly, if you summoned a creature who's enabled to actually make an attack of their own, they could indeed
be enhancing that.
Again, what Chris is saying earlier, it comes down to basically what you've described, what the situation is, and I think it's a fair statement to say a lot of the magic is sort of half mechanical and half on the edge of your seat. You really got to think on your feet as a GM and the players. Don't feel too tied to the rules as written, because sometimes it may be better to embellish it a little tiny bit to make the story more fun for everyone at the table.
And I think that's the key, is because you've got, a lot of people are really hung up on this whole, I've got to make my D&D game, it has to be a certain spell that is cast in this sort of way. And I think that once exactly, I agree. That why do they have to have that? Just release yourself from that and allow your narrative control to give more influence to what you're actually doing, so that, ultimately it goes whatever looks cool on film. That's my rule of thumb.
Agreed.
The rule of cool. The thing is, though, ironically, you can do that in D&D still. If you're casting, say, a spell that's listed as being something, described as something, just embellish what it is. Make up your own flair. Mechanically, it has the same effect.
Yeah,
it just looks different. Like, for example, I was playing a D&D character not too long ago, a 5th ed character, and had Ray of Sickness.
Right,
and he was a crow man, whatever they call it, a tengu or something like that.
Tengu or tengu.
Yeah, he was very dark. He was a very dark, insidious person. So my Ray of Sickness was actually a Ray of Dysentery. So everyone that his Ray of Sickness hit had instant, immediate, hardcore dysentery.
Wow.
So it was still just Ray of Sickness, but it was more than just a few guys feeling queasy. It immediately painted a much more brutal undertone to a very low-level spell.
Right.
Which I think you can do with spells.
Can I bitch about something for a minute?
You go right ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. I have fun with these questions, and they're a lot of fun. It's like, oh man, that's how you could do that spell. That's how you could do that spell. And in the back of my mind, because it's me, okay? In the back of my mind, I'm like, why the F am I even bothering? It's like, how do you make this spell? You can't. This isn't D&D. We have a Terrinoth setting. There isn't a Wall of Fire spell in Terrinoth.
Yeah.
Okay? It's like, you know what? How do you make this spell? That spell doesn't exist in this setting. That spell, no one's ever seen that spell before. You're like imposing D&D onto, it's like, guys, come on. These are the magic rules. You've got all these incredible options. Come up with something creative.
Sure. But
do it.
I think, though, that the thing that we don't want to do, and I think this goes with any sort of, anyone who is trying to really push this whole narrative flair for gaming, is to not sort of take that sort of almost adversarial or approach.
You don't want to
them
give a
and
hard
sort of,
no.
No, you don't want to give them a hard no. You want to go, yes, you can, but it's going to be this difficulty, and it's going to be
or it's going to be different. I guess that's what I'm saying. Because all the pushback I get from suggestions is like, well, that doesn't represent the spell very well. I'm like, okay, but that spell was made in a different system using a different set of rules. Of course it's not going to represent it very well.
Sure.
You're never going to have this one-to-one transference, guys.
No.
I'm not criticizing people who have that sort of mindset at all. But what sort of leaves me scratching my head is people who want one-for-ones. Then if you want that, then why are you moving to Genesys?
Yeah.
Well, you have to kind of take it into two. You can't have the freedom of a narrative system and then want a hard, rigid spell system. It doesn't. It doesn't work like that.
But then think again. This is a narrative system, and think of the core rulebook as a guideline. And if you really want that spell that can do that cool thing that you've seen in another, make it a new magic action.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be held back by what's in here. You just take a couple of different additional effects that are already in the book, slap them into one chart. You can do that. You don't have to be held back by what's here.
Yep.
Create your own stuff.
Seriously,
that is what this is all about.
If you can't create 99% of the spells that show up in D&D, etc., with these rules, then you're not thinking out of the box enough.
Yeah.
No.
But as you're saying, GM Flano, you can just add to it, make your own stuff.
Well, to derail
or even
away.
make the same stuff but fit within the setting that you're talking about. So as we were talking about before, like using what's currently around in the scene, doing the role play that we've all signed up for and using that narrative dice, or making it fit for that setting. Like we were talking before about using biotics. It's a spell, it works, but narratively and visually, when you're describing it to your characters, it might operate the same as something in D&D, but it fits within the setting because of how you've described it and how you're role-playing it out.
Yep.
Dress it up. Reskin.
Reskin. That's something that
Nothing wrong with that.
No, we've mentioned that with adversaries before. There's nothing wrong with having, a guard in one place can look completely different.
Because the players never got to know the difference.
No, they're not. They're not seeing behind the screen.
No, I mean, a little bit different here because, they're the ones that are using the spell.
Obviously.
But at the same time,
you need to be able to use your imagination.
Yeah, and I mean, if you do something which is really cool and you want to, as a player, and you want to have some sort of consistency there, and the GM has allowed you to do something, fine. Write it down. And have that available so that you can do it again.
And I think we're forgetting something as well. There's one important thing that this system brings that allows you to do almost anything that's not written down.
Yep.
Within reason, of course.
Sure.
And that's story points. If you find some bizarre thing that you can't do in or even out of magic, flip a story point.
Yeah.
Fixed.
Yep.
That is true.
Yep.
Now, just while we are talking about, how do you do this and all of that, the one thing that I thought Terrinoth would bring to the table that it didn't, because I expected this because of the lore in Terrinoth, is portals and teleportation.
Yep.
It's not in there, and I don't really know how you would represent that. Any ideas?
Woof. I was fortunate
let's ask Mike. He's the solver of all problems at
the moment. Oh, man.
You conjure yourself somewhere else and dispel the other you?
Yeah. Conjure's pretty flexible.
I don't know.
Okay, so
you might think it would fit in utility, but unfortunately,
it's
utility is limited to easy spells.
Yeah, and this is not easy.
That certainly would not be easy. For Harry Potter, I allowed for harder utility spells because we see a lot of them.
Yep.
And so my gut reaction would be to say, no, it's a utility spell. And narratively, whatever magic is whatever magic it is, whether that's tree walk, which is a druidic thing, right? Or a divine thing or an arcane thing, and just the distance you travel is going to affect the difficulty.
Okay, I'm going to throw something out there because I've thought about this long and hard.
Yeah, because I 100% thought that they would introduce this as a new magic action in Terrinoth, and it wasn't there. So
the answer to the question is it's augment.
Augment.
And the reason why I say that is because of Swift. Because Swift says targets affected by the spell ignore the effects of difficult terrain and cannot be immobilized. So let's just focus on that first part, where it basically says that it destroys or it ignores the effect of difficult terrain. Okay. So, yes, they've got to move. So, I don't know whether this is the complete answer, but it is certainly the start of it. And I tell you what, if somebody was to say, okay, I want to teleport, because teleport is a pretty powerful, higher level spell, is that you go, okay, so I'm going to do Swift, but I want to add this particular effect. I would suggest that the Augment, because it starts as 2 purples, okay, it would be a 5 difficulty spell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you've got you've got 2 for the base difficulty, another 1 for the Swift, and then another 2 because you're doing something which is completely out of the norm.
Yeah.
Or you spend a story point.
So I've posed this question.
Yep.
I do have an idea in my head how I would do it, but there's no one correct answer.
Right.
And I'm sort of the same mind as Huzz in that I would see it as being a conjure. It's a bit hinky. But
are you conjuring a portal? Or are you teleporting yourself?
In D&D, a teleportation is a conjuration spell.
Okay.
Yes.
It fits under that score.
Yep.
The reason being is that the point of conjuration is that you're moving one object from one place to another. You're not creating a new object.
Yep.
You're taking it from somewhere and putting it here. So it's the reverse when you're teleporting, is you're taking you from here and putting it somewhere else.
Okay.
I think you could honestly argue it both ways, because going by Ian's description of augment, I would say you're augmenting your ability to move around. I would say teleporting via augment is a very Nightcrawler-esque way of teleporting. You're winking in and out. Whilst conjuring, I would say, you conjure a gateway which you physically step into, Stargate style.
Yep. Or you just simply
dimension door.
Yeah, exactly.
Dimension door, yep.
But wouldn't it also, as well as we were talking about, it depends on narratively how you're going to try and do it. When we were talking before about how you can use different types of base skills, like your primal or whatever, depending on what it is you're wanting to do. So why couldn't both be true in the one universe, depending on what it is you're looking at doing?
Absolutely.
So the kicker here also realize if you're going to use conjure, that is limited to arcana and primal. Okay.
Yeah.
So that has to impact your narrative as well, because an arcane spell is going to be very different from a primal spell. And Ian, you talk about augment. That's not even available to an arcane caster.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I don't think the answer is going to lie with one particular spell type. I think it comes like Kaitlin said, it's going to come down to how you narratively describe it. And honestly, that should impact travel times. That should impact what you can take with you. It should impact everything.
Well,
do you guys want to know what I did for Harry Potter? Actually, how I did this for Harry Potter?
Disapparition, yeah.
Because apparition is a thing.
Yep.
We did a lot of playtesting on this, and so first of all, I don't want to go into a detailed thing of my Harry Potter setting, but I replaced the magic skills with Harry Potter magic skills.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So there's 6 of them. Transmutation, charms, all that, right? And charms is the skill that definitely covers apparition. I made it a talent.
Yeah.
And I actually made it a tier 4 talent.
Right.
Where it basically, you can now do this with charms. The base difficulty is hard. And with success, you're instantly transported to another location within 500 kilometers that you hold firmly in your mind. You have to be intimately familiar with it or be able to remember it with clarity. Maybe you could view a picture, but the GM would probably upgrade the difficulty. However, I then said that apparition has no limit on distance, actually, but the distance traveled does upgrade the base difficulty of charms. So if it was within 500 kilometers, you use that base of hard. But as you go beyond that, the GM could upgrade the difficulty 3-4 times potentially for like intercontinental apparition. Additionally, upgrades occur if you choose to take one or more people with you. And the idea here is if you get lots of threat or despair, that's where splinching comes in, which is where body parts fail to arrive with the character.
I've never heard that. Is that a Harry Potter
term? Or imagine if you're traveling with someone else and your body parts get switched with whoever you were traveling with.
I mean, stuff like that. But in terms of like Harry Potter canon, there's this very. I mean, we see it. I mean, they apparate out of the Ministry of Magic in the very last book, and Ron gets splinched. is heavily injured. And so, I mean, it happens. So this is another option to consider as well. And obviously this is very custom, and obviously the core book encourages you to make your own talents, but for these really unique magical capabilities, consider a talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because at that point, it's like, okay, is this something that every Magic user really should be able to do? Or do you have this incredibly open system where there's a handful of abilities, just a handful, that you really want to limit? And say, you know what, you really need to undergo some serious study to learn how to do this.
Because essentially what you've done is created a new magic action for Apparition, but put it behind a talent wall because only certain people can do it. And I like that.
Because I tell you what, and this is, because a lot of the grief, I think, that comes from this sort of, well, I can't do this spell, does come from that D20 mentality. Not that I'm going to be, addition elitist or anything.
It sounds like
that.
really bashing D&D today.
I know, but we're not.
It's the
Not
closest
at all.
comparison.
Absolutely. We're wanting to show people who are playing D&D that if they want to come across to Genesys, it's okay. But the thing is that...
We'll accept you.
It's okay, we forgive you.
I was once like you, poor soul.
But what I think is that is escaping a few people is that Genesys itself is their magic section is what? 8 pages? How many pages are dedicated to magic in
That's what I said earlier.
19 pages are dedicated to magic and Genesys.
Yep.
I've got my Pathfinder core rulebook right here.
Yep.
There are over I did the math before this show.
Yep.
There's over 200 28% of the 575 pages in the Pathfinder core rulebook are devoted to magic.
Well, it's more than that. Also, when you factor in the fact that each spellcaster character has their own list of rules on how to handle and juggle their spells.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess when we're talking apples to apples, we're not at all, because there is a small number of pages for Genesys, lots and lots of pages for Pathfinder, and I think that comparing the two is just impossible.
And a lot of people are trying to, though. That's the thing.
Look, they are, but the thing is that the way that it will probably happen, and a lot of people thought that Terrinoth would answer a lot of questions, but obviously they've taken that sort of, it's a setting book as well, so it's got to cover both setting, because the Pathfinder universe, or the Pathfinder rulebook doesn't really cover Galarian. It's required an additional book, and I think that given time, hopefully, is that we will see additional
magic stuff
thrown in under a setting book, or
they've essentially given us all the tools, though.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You can use our time with Genesys as a way to track the general population with magic as well. Because I remember when we very first cracked open Genesys, before deep diving into it, we were a bit, magic's a bit meh. But we hadn't really sat down and appreciated it, because we had done that thing where we skimmed through it and didn't deep dive and really think about the possibilities. And after a couple of weeks, I know you and Martin were all over going crazy and frothing at the mouth for it. And I had to read through it too, and I was like, okay, fair enough, that is cool. Because I too thought, it was like, it's pretty limiting. And Terrinoth might answer the questions. And then by the time Terrinoth came out, we had realised, no, the Genesys covers everything we need. I think that is a lot of people's problems. It's that too long did not read sort of thing, where people are glancing over and going, okay, it's pretty limiting. But it's not at all.
And it's ironic because it's actually it's 19 pages.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like,
but they read.
It's like, but when I cracked the book, I saw 19 pages of magic. I'm like, oh man. And then later, when you start reading, it's like, Mother of God,
sunglasses.
This is amazing.
That is true. That is true. All right, so we've really gone on a tangent
this
time.
But that's okay.
But it's okay. That's okay. That's what we do.
Important tangents.
Important tangents.
Well, I want to talk more about this ray of dysentery by moving into the curse. By moving into the curse spells, because that's totally where it would live.
The reaction to everyone at the table when I said I'm casting a ray of dysentery. No, what happened was I said I cast a ray of sickness, and the GM's like, well, describe what that looks like. And I said, okay, all the guards in the cell suddenly are stricken by hardcore dysentery. And everyone at the table was like, oh. Especially when they started dying from it. It's like,
basically, you would be literally giving people that. Anyway,
that's what I want to. Damn it.
Stuff got messy.
Yeah, stuff got messy. Anyway, because we try to keep a
Clean
G-rated
show
podcast. Yes. Anyway,
But yes, curse, Chris.
talk
Please.
to us about curse.
Well, a curse. It's the opposite. It literally, it's the mirror of augment. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's just the mirror of augment in terms of its difficulties, its effects on people, and damn near the additional effects that it applies. It's almost the mirror of augment. And when you get into the Ian, you talk about setback dice earlier. When you get into the non-structural uses, it actually calls out, like, look, if you want to throw setback dice on somebody, curse, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's what it's for. However you narratively describe it, whether it's sickness, illness, withering, magical force bearing down on them, it's there. The one thing about curse that I absolutely love, and I know you guys are going to chime in with your own additional effects, but I got to give major love to Doom.
Especially when that metal soundtrack starts playing.
Good idea.
Basically, extra 2 difficulty. It's Arcana only, okay?
Yep.
Extra 2 difficulty, but and this is any time the spell is in effect, after the target makes a check, pick one of the dice in their dice pool that is not displaying a triumph or a despair and change it to a different face.
That is truly amazing.
That is cool.
So change
that
it
means
to a despair.
That means you could give them a despair, or you could take away success or something like that. Yeah.
So I've got a question about that. This is my own personal question.
Yep.
Could you potentially curse an ally and give them a triumph with that?
That's
There's Martin breaking the game.
there you go. That's interesting. I don't know.
I would call that the stinkiest amount of Limburger cheese I've ever heard in my life.
You haven't really met me, have you?
Yes.
There's a reason why I play Scorpion.
I think that is a
Particularly
compliment.
considering that one of my favorite talents of special abilities of the Star Wars systems was Unmatched Fortune. That sounds
Yes.
amazing to me.
Yes. You could do stuff like that, but no.
Expect your storyteller to go no.
Congratulations, Martin. You've just poisoned every single listener who will do that exploit. Please edit that out, Martin.
Yeah, right. Very good. Excellent. So yeah, look, to me, curse is the realm of the sleep spell. That's where I've sort of see that.
Have you seen the paralyzed action?
I have seen the paralyzed action. It's insanely difficult, but wow.
It pays off.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, ultimately, if you've got some sort of a focus, that then turns into only a hard spell. If you've got a magical artifact or just a wand or whatever else, you can reduce that.
Or it's a signature spell.
Or it's a signature spell.
You got hold person as your special shtick.
Exactly right. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with dispel. I'm sorry, with curse as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anything in particular, Chris, that you find that that people should be aware of when it comes to curse?
More than any other spell type, you need to be careful.
Yep.
Because you can break this unintentionally very easily. If you're not
Like Martin just did. Yes.
In about 3.2 seconds.
You need to be very, 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 very judicious.
Yep.
And sometimes that means sacrificing things we know and love because it's just way too powerful. Let me give you a phenomenal example. In Harry Potter, we see little Hermione Granger stop Neville Longbottom in one of the early books by casting Petrificus Totalis on him, right?
Yep.
So it literally gives him the paralyzed action. Okay, that's what it is. That's how you manifest it. There is no way on God's green earth that little Hermione Granger could manage a 5 purple difficulty curse spell.
Oh, come on.
At that age. Maybe she could. Maybe.
Blank, purple dice?
Yeah. And so there's times you just kind of got to break your suspension of disbelief and realize that, you know, just because it's really awesome in a particular scene in an intellectual property, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to safe and fun game mechanics at the table. Just be careful.
You can apply that to anything. Like in a Star Wars campaign, your character is very unlikely to be firing 2 proton torpedoes down a 2-meter chute at creation and blowing up a Death Star.
Surely he rolled
very
a
true.
triumph, though.
Or destroying TIE fighters with lightsabers.
Couple of triumphs.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Destroying
It's very
lightsabers.
true.
Yes. Anyway, thanks, Rebel. So we've covered Curse. Now let's talk about. You mentioned before, Chris, that Dispel is probably the one that the most people have the hardest time with. So let's look at Dispel.
You guys can get into Dispel, but the reason my players have had the hardest time with it is because it's actually the simplest spell. Once you start to understand how diverse this is, you're like, when you look at Dispel, it's like, wait a minute. It's almost like they feel like they're being tricked. Does that make sense?
It should be more complicated than this, but it's not.
That sounds like the
really
whole
not.
the spell section in general to most players, if you ask me. What? This can't be this easy.
Look, I guess it kind of, to me anyway, that when I looked at spells, spells, you mentioned this before, Huzz, is that you look at it and go, oh, wow, that's a lot of text to deal with. And kind of when you first look at the dice mechanics generally, and I know that Chris has said this before on the show, that you kind of just you read it and you've glazed over it. It's sort of, you know, it seems a little bit daunting, but once you start to really get into it, it's a lot less complicated.
I'm a perfect example of that. I've read the magic section numerous times.
Yep.
How I'm one of those people who learn through examples and doing.
Yep.
So now that I'm sitting here talking to you guys and I'm learning, it's all falling into place.
Yep.
So now I know I really want to play a spell user because now I legit understand it.
Yep.
I'm probably not the only person like that out there. So
That's right. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this episode in the first place, so that people can really get an idea of how it actually works. Because it's all very well and good to have it on paper, but to have somebody like ourselves, you know, explaining it with people like Kat and Mike who haven't sort of had that experience before, they can sort of learn from what we've pulled from the system.
Now, just to give us a little bit of an example of how Dispel works, there was a question that I saw on the Facebook about supernatural beings, aka like a demon,
Right.
that are in our world, and you want to send them back home.
Right.
I personally think that this should be Dispel.
Okay. Like dismissal. Is that's
Like a
what-
dismissal spell.
Yeah.
I think that this should be covered under Dispel because
Using
it is
Divine?
such... Sorry?
using Divine?
Using Divine.
Yeah, buddy.
Yep, because it'd be a Divine-only action, dismissal. And it would be...
but Divine can't be used with Dispel.
Oh, no.
Well, okay,
Uh-oh.
yes, but remember what we've said earlier.
You have to smite them with your
But I mean,
mace.
spellcasters, arcane wizards can also do things like this occasionally, depending on what setting you're looking at, what spells you're looking at. But the idea is essentially that you would these creatures, however they've gotten here, don't belong here. They have got some lingering magical or supernatural effect that's keeping them here.
Yeah.
So if you dispel them, they go home.
Right.
That spell ends or that effect ends and they go away.
Depends on the demons.
I think that works for demons, right?
Some demons.
Some demons. Others don't get affected by it. Or if there's something special about them that's allowing them to be here, maybe they've got, as an NPC, something that says hard to dismiss. And so it increases the difficulty, or they have to spend a story point to even attempt it.
Yep.
Something like that. But as an example of how this works, you simply make a 3 difficulty check to end the spell.
Right.
That's it. Dispel is so easy in that that's how it works.
It's also good to remember that for the GMs who are being onslaughted by players with lots of magic, i.e. Martin and his broken spells. They can also, if they have a spell user, dismiss the PC's spells very, very, well, not very easily, but with little effort.
It's hard.
It's hard, but yeah, it's good to know.
So I have a different viewpoint.
Absolutely. Hit us.
Okay, if somebody conjures a demon, literally casts a conjuration spell right there, okay? yeah, dude, dispel, it's gone. It's winked out of existence. Bye-bye. Okay, it's gone. If this is something that's been on our plane for centuries, okay?
Sure.
Of its own volition, it doesn't belong here. There's no concentration maintenance spell keeping it here, okay? Again, Arcana, I would let you use Dispel to get rid of it, but I would make it probably, depending on the power of the creature, I would make it a formidable check, or maybe 4 dice.
Well, this is.
But also keep.
Sorry.
Also keep in mind though that if the creature, you may not even have to do that, because if the creature's powerful enough, and if they have adversary talents, one of the things we've also not talked about with Magic is there's a wonderful little sidebar in the chapter that basically says, look, if an adversary has adversary talents, you best be applying that to the difficulties for spells that target that creature.
Yeah, so if you've got a big demon running around, you don't need to even add anything extra. Just give them adversary. And they're really hard to just get rid of them.
I mean, these are things that, these massive demons, that, they are going to have adversary. And if they don't, why the hell not? So,
they better. Now, if you're really a raw monkey and you don't want to give divine casters the ability to access Dispel, which they can't via the rules, Dispel is a natural choice for this. Another one, we just talked about Curse. Curse is available to define.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, you're negatively impacting a target without dealing damage to them.
Yep.
That is a curse spell.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You could even use the Sanctuary spell from Barrier as a divine-only action, because it pushes them away. You could say for an increase of difficulty that it actually banishes them from this plane, not just from your presence, from this plane. I mean, there's different ways of doing it.
Look, again, I don't think there is any correct way of doing it. And I think a lot of people are after that.
One way.
Well, give me the correct way, and I want that as a rule, and so that I can use that at my table and beat my GM over the head with it. Well, sorry, that's not
Genesis. Go play D&D.
That is not how this game works. It is very much along the lines of, okay, there may be 2, 3, 4 or more ways to do the one thing, and it's just whatever. If the player is trying to twist their skill to do something, it means that they're thinking about their character. It means that they're actually putting some effort in, and that itself needs to be rewarded.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Amen.
So, yeah.
So
all right.
We've got one more action.
Yes.
And then a special...
2.
Well, you've got Counterspell. But that's a different thing. So we'll get to that. We've got Heal to look at.
Yes, we do. Okay, now basically Heal. The difficulty with a heal, it's just an easy check. So upon success, the character heals 1 wound per uncancelled success, and 1 strain per uncancelled advantage, which is very, very simple. But there are additional things that obviously you can do. Like you can affect additional targets.
A mass heal.
Affect range. So you're going in front of your congregation and healing them all. Restoration. Heal a critical. Revive an incapacitated character. So somebody who's who currently has the incapacitated condition. And then obviously Resurrection, which has a whopping great +4 difficulty. So you're talking about a 5 difficulty to raise somebody from the dead, which is
and if you fail,
big deal.
And if you fail, you can't attempt this again.
No, exactly.
No one can attempt it again.
Yeah,
no one.
That's right.
That's big.
But I tell you what, if I was to roll a triumph on that, I would potentially look at breaking that, but there may be a quest involved or something like that.
Well, yeah, if you fail to resurrect them, but you get a triumph, that is a good use for it.
What ones you've rolled a spare?
Well, you bring back somebody else.
You bring back something.
Exactly. You might bring back them, but they're going to have somebody on board.
Or maybe bring them back, but it's a shame if you brought them back into the pits of hell, and the parties have to go to a quest to rescue their soul.
Yes. I'd even go so far as to, for those people who are Buffy fans, when they decided to bring back Buffy after...
No one here is a Buffy fan.
Wow.
Do we know anyone?
Kaitlin?
That's so mean. I haven't been gone that long. You've already forgotten all about me.
I don't care for Joss Whedon.
Oh, no.
Get out.
Wow.
That is a
sarcasm,
stake
guys. That's
through the
I was
heart.
going to say, I can't handle that. My heart
And
can't
you're
handle
to
that
blame.
kind of pain.
When you hear me affect the nerd voice, that's sarcasm. It's okay.
Okay.
All right.
But yeah, so like...
I was gonna have to like hang up because I'm like I can't be around.
It's like Firefly. Like I just didn't get it. You know.
Oh, now I hear it. Now I hear it.
But yeah, so a despair may be the case, and sure, you've pulled that character back out of wherever they were, but that character was in heaven when you did that. They
don't like
made peace with it, and the sort of the role play
Or
effects that could be, it
Maybe
could be amazing.
Maybe you do bring them back. However, say you're successful
Yep.
with the despair. Everyone's favorite. You
Yep.
bring them back,
Yep.
but they're not happy about being brought back because they had a surround sound TV set up in heaven. They had it sweet, and they don't want to come back here and deal with your rubbish.
No,
so
exactly.
They come back not as a friend anymore, as a
Oh, as an
GM
enemy.
controlled nemesis.
Wow.
This is something else that happened actually happened in a game that I was playing in. One of my friend's characters died through some stupid positioning errors,
Yep.
and he died like in a single hit. We then resurrected him, but it took a little while. But because time flows differently beyond the veil,
Yep.
he'd spent 10,000 years in hell being tortured by the demon that was responsible
That's
for
very
his soul.
supernatural. Literally.
So he came.
That's what they did in Supernatural.
He came back as a very tortured character, and yeah, that to me sounds like a despair.
Yes. That's cool.
He
But
remembered every minute of it.
Wow. That's one. Yeah. Wow. That's cool. And
Yeah.
see that sort of thing. If you've got a good player who is cool with that,
Yeah.
they can play that up to an nth degree.
And he did. It was good.
That's cool.
Or what about rather than bringing back from the dead, you actually just if you're having like a multi-universe running in parallel with each other type of thing, you bring back the same person but from a different universe and a different
That's interesting.
different paralleled universe, and they have to be like,
That's a sci-fi
what's
effect.
going on?
I like that.
Yes,
Or
that's a sci-fi.
or you
thing.
bring them in from the past. So you get a pluck them from the past, and you get
Wow.
a 20-year younger version of that person.
Oh,
running
my
around.
trouble just does my head in. But yes,
This so many things.
It's also very dependent on the world you're in. Like if you're doing
Yeah.
this in a 40k setting,
yep.
I'm going to have so much fun with that as the GM and what happens with that person and you as the rest of the party.
You just
Yeah.
get their body. The rest is filled by
you get
demon.
you get something in and none of it's
Oh
any
my
good.
god!
Well,
That is just disturbing. But anyway, all right. So yeah, so
That needs to be put on a shirt somehow. I don't know how.
you get me,
You
but
just
I'm
get
full
the
of
body.
demons.
The rest is filled with demons. I love that. How would you describe yourself?
That's perfect for a shirt.
oh dear. All right, so we've basically got
Those are all the actions.
yeah, they're all the actions.
Well, hang on.
no,
Now,
we've still
Ian,
got
we actually had a Facebook question about heal. didn't we?
What?
Oh, we did.
Oh, we did.
did.
We've actually
We
got a
did.
few Facebook questions about some of these things,
We
but
do.
definitely there was one about heal.
So just
it's a Facebook question from Jack Jallo.
And what does Jack say?
He asks, heal states may select one target they are engaged with who is not incapacitated. Where does self-healing come into play via the core rulebook? Does it? Is it similar to using medical checks on yourself in Edge of the Empire? I didn't see a similar rule in Genesys about medical checks on yourself. If I remember correctly, from the Edge of the Empire core rulebook, you gain a setback on medicine checks made on yourself. Personally, right now, I run heal on yourself as the same as healing another, but with an extra difficulty. I feel like it balances itself out, especially when taking strain upon resolving magic checks. But I thought it would be nice to hear from someone else on what they would do, or if maybe they caught something I had missed about the subject.
Good question.
Oh, yeah, I got some experience with this.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the answer could also much rely on the wording of how you do a range attack. You must be at short range.
Right.
So it's this very similar thing to that. Maybe you have to increase the difficulty
by
to
one.
heal yourself, which Jack's already doing.
Okay.
So I think
a couple of things
But-
that he got wrong there, but I just want to correct him as far as the rules go. So I apologise, Jack. But basically what happens is that if you're trying to do a medical check on yourself, you increase the difficulty by 2, not by 1.
Which is on page 116.
Yep, which is the same in the Genesys rulebook.
Yep.
So, personally, if that was the case, I would use that because it's a nice guideline that you can go, right, well, yeah, I'm going to heal myself, but it's just going to increase it by 2.
Which is essentially...
Well,
but if you're doing
disregard.
that, it's essentially adding an extra additional effect to the chart
True.
that increases the difficulty by 2 in order to target yourself.
Yeah.
That's one way of handling it.
Yep.
But I think Chris has got another
so
idea.
here's the problem.
Go.
All right, and I said this was going to come back around with Jack's check. Okay?
Sure.
Here's the problem. In playtesting this extensively, here's what I found. Look. This is like the one of the only times where you see where it says.
Oh, that's right.
And I'm reading it. Select one target you were engaged with, and there is no parentheses that says.
That can't be you.
Which can be yourself. That's explicitly not here, and it's not here for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not here for a reason because you suffer 2 strain to cast the spell, and I'm sorry, generating 2 advantage on a check this easy, you will literally be able to spam heal yourself.
Yeah.
True.
Okay.
Which is the...
That's the problem.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're gonna house rule this. And allow you to break the raw and apply healing to yourself.
Yeah.
I think +2 difficulty is a minimum of what it would need to be because you've got to counteract that easy advantage generation that you're going to have.
That's very true.
The other thing as well that I might consider, and I don't know whether you agree with this or not, but certainly something you might want to consider is the way that stim packs, for example, are used. Is that the first time you do it, you can get it done at full. The next time that it can be, you can get the same sort of effect, but it's at a reduced number of times that it can heal.
That works. It just adds a whole lot of extra new rules to one spell.
A lot.
Sure, yeah,
it's a lot of
exactly.
complexity.
Yeah, exactly.
And furthermore, depending on the successes you roll each time, you could heal 7 wounds the first check. The second check, you heal 12.
Yeah.
Well, there is one way you can do it as well.
Yes.
That if you wanted to try and balance, this is pure house rule, of course.
Yep.
I would rule it, upgrade the check twice as a bare minimum if you're healing yourself.
Upgrade or increase?
Increase the check twice if you're healing yourself. However, if every failed result injures you. So if you fail the checking with 3 failures, you take 3 wounds.
Right. Yeah.
If you really wanted to keep it somewhat balanced,
Yep.
so the healer can't just self-heal themselves for days. So he has to stop and think about it for a moment. It's like, oh, do I really want to heal myself? Because I'm already at threshold, and if I fail this, I'm unconscious. So the healing really should be coming from someone else if they want a guaranteed heal result. That's purely house ruled, and if that's one way you could do it, whilst keeping a little bit of balance to it, I think.
There's another suggestion that I have, which is sort of takes from both, but in Shadowrun, magical healing can only heal you once per set of wounds.
Right.
You can emulate that in this by saying once per encounter or once per session.
Yeah, you could say that it would make for a much more lethal and dangerous setting, but you could only magically heal or try to close those wounds once. So
Or another one, maybe a enemy spellcaster can simply dispel that healing you've done. That's 4 healing. Sweet, I dispel it.
Wow.
The tank suddenly goes, oh, you need to do it because the healing he's taken just goes away. All his wounds reopen up and he just starts bleeding profusely again. That crit you've just healed,
Yep.
see ya. And that arm that just regrew suddenly falls off again.
It'd be interesting if you did that, where healing is a temporary effect until natural healing would otherwise catch up to it.
Yep.
And that it could be dispelled in that. That's interesting.
See, to me, something like that would be an attack spell still, but narratively, that's how it's described that it is.
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah,
that you're
that's
undoing the healing. That like it's reverse wounded, like reverse healing.
But to answer Jack's question,
Yes.
raw,
Yes.
no, you can't.
You can't do it.
No.
You could have it as you're playing, upgrade twice per normal healing. However, or more. Chris has
as
stated
Chris has
though
pointed
it's
out.
OP, so you may it's potentially
There's
OP.
a reason why it's not in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you may want to just leave it out and play by raw completely.
Yep.
Or you can really spice it up and get creative with it too, if you really wanted to, by dispelling healing, extra damage if you fail, etc. There's lots you can do.
Yeah.
By adding the increased difficulty twice, you're already house ruling it.
Yep.
So you might as well, if you're going to start house ruling stuff like that, you might as well make it a bit more spicy and
you could
ramp it
add
up.
so much. You could, by doing this, you're really developing some of the lore that surrounds the
absolutely.
setting that you're playing in.
Yeah, true.
If magic was a much more temperamental thing in your world, you could have the healing very temporary until it's had time to fully solidify.
Yeah.
And so the caster can have his healing dispelled, or maybe the caster has to keep his healing conjured. So he has to dedicate a maneuver every single turn
Until
to
you get
keep
your
the
healing
healing
catches
he's
up.
dished out to the party.
Yeah.
So that's another way of doing
Absolutely right.
it. So if your healer dies, he's conjuring all the party's healing. Oh no, party's dead.
As all of their wounds unravel.
Unknit. The party just like unfurls in ribbons as all the healing is sustained. Catches
You
up.
guys are so cute. like this is how jaded I am. I'm like, that's a really cool house rule. That's a really cool house rule. That's a really cool house rule. In the back of my mind, I'm like, God, that's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, but ultimately you can just say, but it doesn't work like that. Flip a story point. Yeah, it does. And yeah, I mean that's
No, these are all great suggestions, and dude, there's so much you can do with that. I mean, yeah, man. If you're gonna go, you're right. If you're gonna go house rule, make it spicy.
Yeah.
Get fun, and like you said, Ian, it's if you tell me you're going to increase you could accept an increased difficulty and you're going to flip a story point, there's not a lot I'm not going to let you attempt.
no, that's exactly right.
But
Because then you just flip it back and you just go, yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Let's see this happen.
But adding a story point flip to it, that's another good way of solving this. If you really want to heal yourself,
Yep.
you're going to accept the 2 difficulty upgrade and add a story point flip. It means you're not going to be just spam healing yourself. It can't happen.
Exactly.
No, that's right.
That's a good way of handling
Because
it.
there is a limiting factor, because especially in a setting like Terrinoth, you're using story points like there is no tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because you don't have as many story points as you do destiny points.
Well, hey, make this a heroic ability. That you can self-heal.
Now you're talking. But anyway, that sounds like
We're getting way off.
like a superpower. But anyway, okay. So to bring us back on track, let's talk about the last action that we haven't actually talked about, which is utility. Now, I know that we touched base on it a little bit earlier. So, Martin, take us through utility action.
That's okay. So the utility spell is really simple.
Yep.
It may look complicated when you look at the text, but it boils down to it's basically a cantrip. So a spell that has numerous effects, anything you can describe, but it's all narrative. So sure, if you want to say that your character is actually floating a foot above the ground, because that's cool, that's an easy check.
Yep.
You cast the spell, it happens. You're going to have to maintain it, though, so that's maintaining, which is a maneuver that you can do.
Yep.
But if it's anything...
Actually, you can't maintain utility spells.
Oh, that's right. My mistake. But...
See? There you go.
Yeah.
But to add even more fuel to your fire and to make your point for you, they can't be that complex.
That's right. So if they're more complex than an easy check, it's not a utility spell. It falls under something else.
Wait a minute, I thought utility spells had no check at all. You just do them.
No, utility.
It's one purple die.
One
One
purple.
purple.
Oh, is it? Okay, my bad.
So utility magic doesn't have an equivalent action in structured encounters. Obviously.
Oh, in structured. Okay, so in narrative, you don't just do it.
Yeah, so a check to cast a utility spell should always be easy. Always be
If
easy.
it's any more complicated than that, you can't do it.
So most of the time, out of combat, I would just hand wave the check entirely. Just go.
If you're good enough at it, probably. Like
Again, it's that thing. It's that thing of if it is important to roll. If a person wants to create a lantern, just let them have the
But I
lantern.
mean, if you want to if you want to create a spark to catch fire to pile of oil that leads to that pyre that's important for the story,
Obviously,
you've got to make a check.
That'd be a check. Yeah.
It is still an
and
action to do. But
I also have to apologize. I was looking at incorrect notes. You can't. There's nothing that says you cannot maintain utility spells. My mistake.
So yes, you can do that.
I'm totally wrong because of course you can because utility covers things like Mage Light or things that you're obviously going to want to maintain round to round.
Dice pool 1, order 66.
Hey.
Whoa.
If only I podcasted about this system.
However, that's one of the maneuvers, because we've talked all about magic actions.
Yes.
There is another magic maneuver that you can do, which is called counterspell.
Tell me about this other magic maneuver of yours, Martin. I'm very keen to hear it.
But essentially, a spellcaster can attempt to counter an opponent's spells as they're being cast.
Right.
If the character performs the counterspell maneuver, all opponents within medium range upgrade the difficulty of checks to cast spells once until the end of the character's next turn. This is really powerful because, as you remember, we discussed earlier, you cannot cast a spell that goes above difficulty 5.
Yep.
So what happens if you've got a couple of spellcasters all doing the counterspell maneuver? You could shut down magic in an area.
I guess that's why you target the spellcasters first, like in many, action RPGs.
Yep.
The spellcasters sitting in the back doing the annoying things. The players are going to want to go and deal with them. Send the tank in, send the warrior in to go cut their heads off. So the spellcaster can get that conjuration off to save the world.
Counterspelling is actually dangerous as hell.
Yeah.
Because it's not increase the difficulty, it's upgrade the difficulty.
Oh, that's
So-
good cat.
So you got counterspellers, you got multiple people counterspelling, you have threat and despair city happening if anyone tries to cast a spell. And as we know, horrible things happen when you get those things.
So I take that back. It doesn't...
two despairs, the magic goes out of control. So yeah.
But so I take that back. You can't shut down magic in an area, but you can make it so dangerous that you really shouldn't attempt it.
Well, it's actually strong. As Chris says, it's probably actually stronger because if you're casting a spell with only 3 difficulty and there's 3, I've got 3 upgrades to it. Then I'm like, well, you know what? I'm not going to cast this normally not so difficult spell.
Yeah. You're still going to effectively shut down magic in the area.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to cast. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because if you upgrade and you don't have you can't change any dice to red dice, it's going to go to a purple. So yeah, you can make things pretty damn difficult.
Slowly up and up. Yeah.
Could you imagine that thrown in with what was it? With Dispel. Let's just turn some of those into despairs.
Yeah.
Oh, could you imagine trying to heal someone in that situation and you roll despair?
Good gravy.
But that's that.
Enjoy being turned inside out.
And we've already touched on
Wow.
I feel great.
the skin on the inside.
Very good.
But we've already touched on magic implements for the most part. I mean, there's some more minutiae there, but we can get to that another time.
Look, I think, and this is important. This is very, very important. I think that this is obviously a topic which is close to people, that they're asking a lot of questions on. So I think that it's important we try to cover as much as we possibly can in the short amount of time that we've got. But we will be doing a second episode in relation to
at this point we definitely need to,
because we need to really talk about magical talents and how they can be used. Talking about implements,
because there's a lot more we can talk about implements.
Oh, absolutely, and even the creation of magical items as well.
Yep.
And things like that. And then, of course, we've got house rules, so I can see a series of episodes in relation to this. But anyway, so let's answer some of the questions that we've been asked, just in relation to what we've talked about today, and see if we can sort of push people in the right direction. So, which one do you want to hit first?
Well, there's a little short one here from Dominic Parker. And he asks, in Realms of Terrinoth, how much sound do casters make when casting spells?
That's a really good question.
Interesting.
Does a tree make any sound if it falls over in the forest and no one's there?
Well, that might be true, except that it talks about getting setback for not using a voice.
Well, we know a bard automatically makes a bit of sound. Like that's the default.
Otherwise, that's a really they're not going to sell many albums that way. So
there's probably a market.
for no sound. Yes. Anyway. So
I believe there is a song in the real world that is
songs?
just silence,
Wow.
for like 5 minutes.
there you go.
Someone copyrighted that so that they could sue people.
That's ridiculous.
It
Anyway.
exists.
Sounds like
Look
it.
it up.
But
I'm
answer
in
his
the
question.
wrong career.
To answer Dominic's question, what do we think?
Because my point is, when it comes to, there is a specific rule which says that they gain setback if they're, they've got a sock in their mouth, or they're gagged in some way, or whatever. That they can't.
There is a
they can
verbal
cast
component.
but that implies that there is a verbal component, and I think that's what we have to draw from.
And I think that you can cast it, like he says, how much noise do you make? So there's a couple of things involved, and I think in this setting that all spells are assumed to have a verbal, a somatic, which is hand movements and
And
gestures, and probably also a
Components.
a physical component, so an ingredient.
Yep.
So that's all assumed. So if you can't meet these effects, you add setback.
Yep.
So you can still cast a spell if you can't speak.
Yep.
It's just harder. So I'd probably add, if you
Yeah.
can't speak at all,
Yep.
2 setback,
That's
maybe
all right.
3,
Yeah.
depending on what the situation is.
Because Chris, what is the actual? Because the rules are in there for how many setback die you lose.
Yeah.
It's 2 setback die. That's what's on the table, and that's
It
if
is.
you're gagged,
Excellent.
silenced, or otherwise unable to speak. I always
makes
read
sense.
that as, look, I mean, whether you're praying to your god, whether you're reciting a song or an arcane ritual, or calling upon the powers of nature, you've got to talk.
Yeah.
And that's going to be in a normal speaking voice.
Exactly.
And if you so the question is, how loud are you? I would tell Dominic, how loud do you want to be? You're going to be as loud as a normal person talking, unless you want to suffer some setback dice. If you want to whisper, that's 1 setback die. If you want to cast without speaking at all, in which case you're not going to make any sound, that's 2 setback die.
If you want to be a heavy metal bard, well,
That's
didn't really
good.
get into that.
If you want to do a spellcaster who's there bellowing his spell summoning, I would give the player boost dice.
Well, especially if you're a cleric and you're belting out this prayer to your god at the top of your lungs, and you're role-playing that, boost die, sure.
The neighbours will be like, "Oh, what's going on again?" There's some sort of cult.
if you're like
that's
if
right.
you're like Celine Dion, the bard, you're belting out this power ballad.
But
Sure.
at the same
Dude,
time,
I had a D&D player once who worshipped, I kid you not, he worshipped Steve Jobs.
Right.
The holy symbol was an apple,
Right.
and he would scream out, "All hail Jobs!" when he would do his spells.
Wow.
It was pretty epic.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I would reward
And then
that
if anyone
play.
tries to go against him, he just throws the apple at them.
Throwing his phone.
That's what I would do.
The critics of the religion are like, they just copied everything else we did, right?
it's the android cult that gets a little bit shirty about it.
Oh, jeez.
The superior cult, let's be honest. But to add to Dominic's question about how much sound do you make in Terrinoth, again, he's asking a very specific question to that setting.
Right.
I can imagine some settings, some spells don't need you to speak or make any sound. Example, Doctor Strange. He doesn't say much when he's opening his portals.
No,
he just
that's
does
true.
hand gestures and whatnot. If we're playing Mass Effect and I'm using my biotics,
Yep.
there's no spell components in that. What it comes down to, though, is you and the players, the GM and the players, establishing your magic rules of your setting. Not so much rules as in what's printed in the book, but what's generally accepted to happen in your magic setting.
Yep.
If you're playing a classical D&D / Terrinoth sort of setting, somatic component, 100%. If you're playing in your Marvel one where you don't have to summon through verbal speech, then I wouldn't worry about having casters have to make sound.
Yeah.
And if they happen to be gagged, I would maybe give them a setback dice because it's just generally unpleasant to sort of, try and do stuff when you're being, gagged or bound or something like that.
Yep.
That's kind of etc.
Right, yes.
There's no better way I could word that without it coming out completely
that's
wrong.
exactly right. Anyway.
But so again, it's up to what you establish with your players before you start playing. If spells require you to talk, then make sure you make it known to the players.
Yep. And that can be part of your session 0 as
absolutely.
well. I know that we keep referring back to session 0, but it's so important.
And not in these
is
sort
to
of
set the ground rules to say this is what our magic looks like.
And that's it. But to be fair, that man come up in session 0 because it is a fairly, small thing. You probably not going to think that far ahead.
No, sure.
But if it comes up and you haven't decided on an answer for it, stop the session for 5 minutes, discuss with your players how magic will work, and then come to a decision. If you can't decide, roll a dice. On a 4+, you have to speak.
Yeah.
If on a 3+, your saying doesn't require you to speak when casting
Absolutely.
spells.
Or you ask the question, as I often do, and say, I don't know, is it?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And then they flip a destiny point, story point, and that's the
it becomes
that's the way that it is. That's canon.
Becomes canon. Yep. Yeah.
Very good. So, Martin, you've got another question for us.
So we've got a question here from the FFG forums by Groggy Golem. And he says, regarding the magic actions or spells that are available, what do you think about the distribution of them across the 3 skills of Arcane, Divine, and Primal? Would you adjust the distribution at all? Have you come up with any extra alternative entries for spell additional effects? As far as game balance goes, do you think it would be too powerful for every spell to be available based on a single skill rather than split to the 3? And we have sort of answered this.
Yeah, we
earlier.
definitely answered that.
That's
saying, as Chris had said before, that it's overpowered.
It's way overpowered to put them all under one skill.
Yep, and
definitely.
it's quite uninteresting.
Yeah, boring.
It takes away a lot of the flavour, and it creates a power stat.
As far as the 3 skills, Chris has mentioned it with Harry Potter, that he has 6. Is that correct, Chris? You've got 6?
6 total.
Yep, yeah. 6 total. I know that when I've got it for my Marvel superhero sort of game that I'm doing, that I've got 6 there. Terrinoth has got 5.
That's a good number.
So it just depends on what you're trying to do.
My superheroic setting of Aegis has 3.
Yeah.
Well, our Knight's Edge that we're working on has 2.
It's got 2.
It has 2.
Yeah.
Well, technically, there's more. Maybe there.
But there's 2.
You could always
expand on, if you want to start releasing expansion packs or whatever. But generally speaking, for Knight's Edge, we've only got the 2. We've got the Seer.
Magic works a little bit differently than Knight's Edge, but effectively
there are other restrictors.
Effectively, it's only 2 mainstream ones.
Yeah.
But no, you should. I think even with the 2 that we've got, there are other restrictors on the Knight's Edge spell casting.
Yeah, sure.
But it's not one. You've got to break that up a little bit in order to stop it from becoming something that is god powered.
Yeah. Unwieldy,
Magic in our Knight's Edge is much more limited, so that's why we've only got the 2.
Because the follow-on question, I think that he mentions that, or maybe he doesn't, that can you expand the number of action types that you've got?
Well, additional effects he specifically calls out.
Yeah, so, additional effects are things like actually in the skill itself. The action.
This is the bolt-ons.
This is, so like you've got the skills and then you've got the sort of action. So that's where we've gone through attack and conjure and whatever else. So is there room then to add additional actions? Terrinoth says no. Terrinoth says that, you leave it as it is. I would like to suggest that there is room to do that.
There is.
But, because I'll use my Marvel setting. I want to add an additional couple, one being that basically is talking about time. Because time travel is a thing in the superhero realm. There are definitely... I think that you could add actions to it, and I think as, in 5 years' time when FFG has had a lot more time to start putting out supplements, you will find that there will be, here's a new action that we're going to put in this particular supplement or something like that.
Okay, so here's the problem, though.
Sure.
Like, people are like, again, people are trying to quantify things that they don't need to because the rules already cover them.
True.
And we had a similar question from Ricky Buxton on Facebook, who said, "Have you seen or been tempted to make any new additional effects for some of the spells?"
Yep.
And he says, example of one he sees a lot is adding hover or fly to augment. You don't need to add the additional effect. I mean, look, those are additional effects to this core structured encounter use of augment. That doesn't mean you can't make a narrative use of augment in the structured encounter.
Sure.
You can use augment to make someone fly. I mean, and you determine the difficulty for that. It doesn't have to be bolted on to also giving them a one extra green die to their pools like the base effect does. Just make them fly. That's an augment spell.
I think it's easy. Well, it's probably the wrong word to use, but I think it's easier to create new stuff than it is to think hard about the stuff that already exists and formulate something from that, because it goes back to what we were saying earlier. There's almost nothing you can't create using what's in this book now. So it can be very easy to go, well, I can't see it straight away in black and white, therefore I'm going to write it in. And I think that's what Chris just said. It's people are writing it in, adding it in, opposed to sitting down and getting creative with it. It would be easy to add a lot of stuff to Magic, but I think given time, the fans might just add a lot of unnecessary stuff and bog down what is meant to be an elegant system. If you start bolting stuff from every direction to cover every single thing, you just have something that just buckles under its own weight, and it's not intended to be that much of a crunchy system. So you've got to be very, very careful what you just chuck on. Sure, you can do it here and there, but only if it's absolutely necessary, because you find something that you cannot cover in your very particular system.
I think that you can do it, but
I'm not saying you can't do it. You just got to be careful about doing it.
Well, especially because I think the reason that a lot of people do it is because they are suffering from that analysis paralysis. They're looking at things and they can't decide what they can and can't do because they can do everything. So they define it. They put something on paper to say, I can do this.
It's that D&D / Pathfinder / almost any other spell system mentality.
But this is the realm of the yes and system.
True.
If someone wants to do something in this system and they say, I want to fly, you say yes, or yes and, or yes but. You say yes, but you've got to do this. This is the difficulty. You don't need, it doesn't need to be quantified. It can just be there.
True. Very, very true. I think to answer the question succinctly, though, if you can't work out exactly how to do a spell from another system using the current Genesys spell system, and you really feel that it deserves another action type, if anything I've learned through this discussion today, then the spell that you're trying to achieve may be better handled as maybe a separate talent. And that's something we can perhaps discuss in the next episode. All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, one of the questions that Ben Mitchell has asked, which is, any tips on using extra advantages during magic skill checks, especially with spell failure, beside just healing strain?
Oh, it's $1 million question. It's so circumstantial.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. If Ben gave us an example, that would have been really good.
Yeah, it would have been really good.
Come on, Ben.
Okay.
Come on, buddy.
But yeah, it's like you can.
I'll give you a scenario.
You go ahead.
All right. I'm going to cast my Ray of Dysentery at the big bad. Okay.
Yep.
I add an additional effect to increase the number of targets. And I fail with 5 advantage.
Wow. Okay. So perhaps, because what's the initial effects of the dysentery? It's in
real life terms? Or I can tell you, it's going to be gross.
Okay. In structured encounter, if you had succeeded, they would be getting a purple die on all of their checks while the spell's maintained.
So that hasn't worked. But with 5 advantages, they are vomiting profusely. So they may have, it could upgrade their next check to do anything because they're trying to hold back the vomit while they're doing that, or having additional setback die, or providing a condition
I think that upgrading their check would be succeeding where you failed.
Correct.
Because you're...
You're upgrading the check rather than increasing the difficulty.
Still, you're getting a benefit.
You're getting a dice benefit for something that... But I think you're right in saying that setback could be something that might be added as a result of this, because that's weaker than adding a thing. And so you've hit them with the spell. They haven't been affected by dysentery, but maybe they got hit in the eye by the ray and they can't see for a turn.
Or even you could cause them strain because it's like,
or maybe they're not distracted by the dysentery, but they have crapped their pants.
Possibly. But also, I think
the sheer thought of what could happen made it happen.
I think you guys might be thinking a little bit too much on the effects on the target.
Right.
In this case, I think maybe you haven't cast a spell at all. With 5 advantages, I'm really charging up that spell of dysentery. So next turn when I attempt it again, I'm going to give them additional effects.
Or you give yourself 2 boosts.
Yeah, 2 boosts. If you want to do it the most
out of the book
way, absolutely. You can do that with advantages in the book as written now. However, what Ben's asking is, are there more special effects?
More special effects,
like, for example, 5 advantages, that's a lot to fail on.
That is a lot to fail.
I'm going to say to the GM, okay, I haven't cast a spell. I haven't actually cast it yet, but I'm souping it up. I'm drawing my arms back, and the toxic blackness is pulling out of the ether up my arms. And then next turn, I'm going to fire this ray of dysentery from my gnarled fingernails. Next turn, the effects, if I succeed, are potentially increased even further. The targets, whoever's affected by the spell, upgrade their checks to resist it, or etc., or take further damage. Or it depends on what the spell exactly is and the effects of it. But I'll look at it as more of a Dragon Ball Z Kamehameha.
Over 9,000!
Well, you're just charging that attack for 3 episodes.
Yeah.
And then when it goes off, it really, really goes off.
Right.
And so it's... So you can look at spells' advantages and bring those advantages back to yourself a lot more. It's something that you can't really do in normal combat. For example, I'm firing my gun. Yep. Most of the time, you're more inclined to give those advantages to the scene. You notice something, you give boosts to other people. Because it doesn't really make sense that you're really charging that shot up in your slug thrower. You could say, I'm aiming and get a boost, but there's only so much you can aim a shot for.
Yep, true.
In Magic, you're just like threats and spares are a lot more powerful. I think you could also make advantages and triumphs a lot more powerful and interesting as well, because you're dealing. It's a yin yang system. Why are threats and despairs more powerful if your advantages can't be a little more spicy as well?
Well, let me give you another example, and this is a real one from Gamer Nation Con this past April.
Right.
Another thing I found to be surprisingly balanced in play is now it doesn't work for every spell. But for many it does. If you fail to succeed, but you get a lot of advantage or a triumph, fire off an additional effect and let it. They don't get the benefit of the primary effect of the spell, but they might get the benefit of an additional effect for like 1 round. So we had a player, and in the Harry Potter game, transmutation is one of the magic skills, right? The player was literally attempting to augment another player, do an augment spell with transmutation, literally giving them kangaroo legs.
This was not me. I'm just saying that. It was not me.
Was not you. Literally was going to give them kangaroo legs, and what it was augment with the swift added on.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Or no, it was haste. That was what it was. It was the augment with haste added on. Okay. So the check failed, but they generated 5 advantage, and it was like, oh my god, what do we want to do with that? And the way we ended up working it was the primary effect failed and the haste failed. You're not going to do that. You didn't get to pull that off. But what we ended up doing is the character still grew these kangaroo legs for 1 round, and basically we gave them the primal fury ability for that 1 round. So they had these muscular kangaroo legs, and literally he just jumped over and was able to kick a bad guy, for an insane amount of unarmed damage for 1 round.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that, and I think that lends itself to what I was going to suggest as well, is that magic, when you fail, it can affect like the magic in the area and things like that, right?
Yep.
Well, maybe it does the same thing when you get advantages. It provides a beneficial effect, kind of like wild magic. If anyone's
true.
seen that from other systems.
Yep.
So yeah, you failed to do what you were trying to do, but something else happens.
Yeah.
Another spell, it actually produces a different effect entirely.
And that's kind of what Chris is basically
It is-
saying.
it is.
And it's
But
perfect.
you were only keeping it within the realms of augment, right?
Well, yeah, and again, it was that was just the decision we made at the time, and again, we wanted it to be a beneficial effect.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to be.
No, but it could.
I mean, I could as long as you keep it within the realm of the skill that's being used, the type of magic,
exactly.
Then that opens up the gates. You're totally right.
It could go to anything.
It sort of reminds me of blast weapons. If you miss with a blast, if you spend 3 advantages, you still get to do the splash damage of the blast.
Yeah, true.
And that's a very unique rule.
Splash damage?
No, I'm saying
That's bad.
This goes back to what Chris
Not
is
okay.
saying. Instead of for 3, if you wanted to, because some players like to have their advantages and everything spelled out, the expenditure spelled out
And
for them on paper.
this spells it out.
If you wanted to create a general house rule again, you could say for 3 advantages, you could use one difficulty mod as additional effect. You can use one for every 3. You can use 1 difficulty mod effect.
Yeah. So
If I have 6 advantages, I could potentially use, if we're using the curse, for example, I could still dish the despair effect on my target if I've missed with 6 advantages.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's any sort of thing that doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that you're trying to do, that you've stated that you wanted to do, hasn't gone off. But that's not to say that something else with the similar sort of vein that you weren't intending still went off anyway.
Yeah, so as a rule of thumb, you can make it that 3 advantages for 1 purple dice of upgrade.
And it doesn't necessarily have to stay within the magic action that you're doing, so long as it's something that's capable of being done by the magic skill that you're employing.
You get really creative with it. And with the advantage of story points, hey, flip it, you can switch to another thing.
But I would suggest, for this sort of thing, it's GM choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or player choice. Well, okay, yeah, it's GM choice to see whether it
it's
goes
random
through.
magic.
Sure. But I mean, the thing that I find a little bit funny when it comes to, well, how can I actually use my advantage? They're asking from a mechanical perspective.
Yeah, okay.
Do they ask the same sort of thing when it comes to combat? When you're firing weapons or when you're making a skill check? You know, and you've got all these massive amounts of advantages. People are very, very quick to come up with a narrative reason for that, but for some reason they seem to be asking for a mechanical benefit when it comes to spells. And I don't necessarily think that is required.
It can be crazy with magic. It can be anything.
Yeah.
You can change the environment with magic.
Get creative.
But what I'm trying to say is that anything that you're doing, just as with regular checks, if you're trying to spend your advantages to create a narrative effect, there is a GM veto in play.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is GM choice. He can say that's a bit out of the realm of what we're trying to achieve here, or that's going to detract from the narrative.
Yeah.
Going back to Chris's example of the Ray of Dysentery, and I failed with five advantages, I could say to the GM, well, I'm casting this and I'm a druid. So imagine I'm casting this and I'm a gross old druid that lives in the woods, covered of bird poo. And long,
I have to imagine that?
Yeah, long. Yeah, well, that's a little bit of imagination, man. That's all it requires. He's this old druid. He's got long nails. His skin's all leathery. He's got dreads, which is matted with junk and mud and etc.
Yep.
And his particular Ray of Dysentery spell, he's failed to get off this round. He's conjuring it up, and the 5 advantages. I say to him, okay, everyone within the effect of that spell, within the spray radius or blast radius,
Splash radius.
splash radius is suddenly now in difficult terrain because I've conjured this really gross swamp where dysentery would come from.
Right.
So that's cool. I like that.
Cool. And the in-game effect is those targets are now in difficult terrain.
Right.
Yep.
It's a small effect, but it's very magically influenced.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a magical forest just sort of in and out of reality where, not forest, sorry, swamp, and there's like big, massive thumb-sized blowflies and mosquitoes around.
Sink up to their calves. And,
and then they're up to the knees in literally brackish water full of all sorts of things I can't say on this rated podcast. And so, imagination is your limitation.
So
more so with spells.
To take that another level further, let's say that it's a Warhammer fantasy setting, okay? And that you've tried to use that as the spell and it's failed. Well, the touch of Nurgle has hit that particular area, and so it sort of
that's the Nurgle swamp.
Yeah. So it's there are certainly. I just think that when any advantage is rolled, it is just up to the players to come up with something that sounds really, really cool. That's going to add to the scene.
The other night, this is stepping away from Magic. This is stepping into the system in general.
Right.
The other night, when I was teaching the guys how to play the Star Wars RPG, using narrative dice, which is Genesys, I said to them, working out the dice results is really easy. You're going to learn how to cancel effects out, no problem at all.
Yep.
That's easy. That's just straight, process of elimination.
Yeah.
The hardest part is training your brain to think on the fly with imagination when it comes to advantages and whatnot.
Sure.
And all of us, anyone who's a veteran to the narrative dice, from coming from Star Wars or playing in Genesys for a while, Magic is that, but on a new level.
True.
You really have to go that step further and really train your brain to reach out and get some cool imaginative stuff.
Yep.
Yes.
Think of something that you see that's cool on screen. That's my reference. When you see a sorcerer on screen casting a spell, and all this stuff's going on around him, what would be awesome to see?
Yep.
And to harvest that part of your imagination.
And look, it goes both ways too. As much as the players have to sort of retrain their brains again for this new subsystem within the narrative dice system, we GMs have to retrain our brains when it comes to threat and despair. We have a nice table to help guide us, but as we all know, those tables are very limiting, and you've got to go beyond that. I think it was the first or second game of Harry Potter I played at Gamer Nation Con, and Ian, I don't know if you were at this table or not. We had a young student who, in the very first encounter, in a Defense Against the Dark Arts class, a boggart is summoned, and through weird narrative circumstance, it has negative magical effects applied to it, and it turns into a real threat of a giant spider that starts attacking everything, right? And one of the students, one of the PCs, had the brilliant idea. She said, I want to conjure a cage around the creature, all right? Like out of thin air. And so we like, okay, great. Well, you can do that through conjure. So let's, so she summoned the cage, and she was actually successful. Insane difficulty, and she was successful, but she had like 4 or 5 threat. All right. And it's like, God, what can I do with that? And you just have to kind of train your brain to kind of think a level higher. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you negatively impact your allies, or, the creature gets some boosts, it can attack you through the cage or something like that. Well, no. The cage was summoned 100 meters in the air on top of the creature, and then it fell crashing through the entirety of Hogwarts Castle before landing on this thing with a thud.
Yep.
It encased it. She was successful, but all these negative consequences come into play.
Yep.
And, that go, it's magic. You have the freedom to get really crazy with not only your advantages, but also your negative consequences as well.
Exactly.
I know. And it also comes down to, if you have a strong understanding and knowledge of the world you're playing in your case, Chris, Harry Potter, you can really get imaginative with those threats and advantages and whatnot the players generate. You roll, and the players don't roll in the shape of disadvantages, threats. Sorry, like I'm super keen to bring this magic system to 40k, because I know the 40k really, really well. Well, Warhammer 40k, and the grim horror of that. I would love to bring this magic system into Dark Heresy, where the Psyker does cast that spell and bad stuff happens. The spell works, but he gets 4th threat. Suddenly he starts bleeding from the eyes and tentacles sprout out of his gums. There's all sorts of things you can do. And if you know the lore really, really well, it's an aid. It helps your imagination really sort of unlock to the next level.
Yeah. Very good.
So I know we're running really short on time, but you lead into one other good question, and if Ian, I don't know if we have time. There was one other question that I would love to get to tonight, mostly because this dude called me out.
Yep.
So
by all means, go right ahead.
This was a Facebook question from Jonas Damgaard Dahl, and he basically said, I love the way Magic works in Genesys. I'm unsure how to best modify it to different settings. As it's currently laid out, the system is based on this premise that, as we said, that caster can attempt to cast any spell they can imagine. You're restricted by the type of spell, which is per raw restricted to certain skills. and two, the difficulty, which could make it very unlikely for a novice to successfully cast a complicated spell. And this works really great with free-form magic, but what about restricted settings? And he says, take, for instance, Harry Potter. I'm looking at you, Chris. Or a setting like The Witcher. Another great setting, by the way.
Yep.
In these settings, magic's more restricted. A caster is not just defined by their skills, mechanically speaking skill ranks, but also by their knowledge of magic. Limits, possibilities, shortcuts, specific spells. Like in Harry Potter cannot cast any spell he wants to. He has to study, learn, and practice to reliably cast different spells. That's why Hogwarts exists. And it's very similar in The Witcher. How can he reflect this in the Genesys system?
I have an idea.
Go.
Yeah.
You cannot exceed a spell difficulty if it exceeds the number of ranks you have in a pertinent knowledge skill.
Sure.
So knowledge arcana, for example. If you have 3 ranks knowledge arcana,
Yep.
you can't cast a spell which is higher than 3 purple dice in difficulty in arcana.
Sure.
So
It's a very good suggestion.
so effectively what that does, if you want to increase your spellcasting, you have to invest your XP into 2 separate pools.
That is a very good way of doing it. It does rely on adding another level of complexity onto it.
That's what this guy's
But
asking
that's what
for.
he's asking for. Exactly. So, and again, it's just like any rule that you decide to put on. As long as everybody's happy with that rule when you start and say, that's how we're going to run this campaign.
Absolutely.
It applies to everybody then, not just the PCs, but it also applies to the bad guys as well. So there's that consistency of rules that's what I'd suggest, definitely.
And if you wanted to keep magic even more limited, like I'm thinking like Witcher, or even to a more greater extent, Game of Thrones, magic is more or less non-existent in Game of Thrones because Game of Thrones is set, is essentially a post-apocalyptic series or world. It's set after mankind, or the world, a greater world, was much greater in terms of magic and your classic fantasy setting. So I would even say if you want to cast a spell in one of those worlds where it's quite rare, maybe it's a story point to even try and cast the spell.
Yeah, sure.
It's a big, so it's not willy-nilly. It's that big moment you've got to do that spell. And even then, if you want to add even more restrictions, just apply a universal limiter to the spell. Like you can't cast spells beyond difficulty 2. And that makes magic immediately still very useful, but far less Hollywood cinematic.
Yep.
Which is a perfect example for it. Like Geralt flings like fireballs, but they're small, little, tiny things which work more like a pistol than a grand fireball that a wizard would cast.
Yep.
Just a different layer or level of magic.
And I mean, you've also got the other thing as well, as you can also say, right, well, to cast magic, it costs more strain.
Yeah, that's no way to do it too.
It's rather than just the 2. You can sort of say, well, look, it actually costs 4 to cast a spell.
In certain settings, that would be entirely
and I mean, if you look at like a blood magic or something like that, you can say, doesn't cost strain at all. It costs wounds to do.
I would like to call out, though, as well, he does mention that the restrictions on how you cast spells and things like that, and that it does certain settings mean that you have to have knowledges of the rules of magic and things like that to do certain effects. Well, that's sort of already included in Genesys, because certain effects that you add to it is also tied to your ranks in knowledge.
Yes.
And how effective they are.
Yep.
So you can attempt to do certain things, but you're not going to be very good at it until you raise that knowledge skill as well.
True.
Because magic isn't just tied to that one magic skill. Yep. Knowledge comes into it very heavily. So
yeah. Again, I guess out of all the subsections of the Genesys rules, like vehicles, combat, social encounters, etc., magic's probably the only one you really have to sit down with as the GM and decide what you're going to keep, change, or throw away, because magic does vary so much depending on setting to setting. So if you are sitting down in that Witcher environment, you're going to have to tweak these magic rules, because these magic rules would not work in The Witcher. So you do have to approach it in a completely different way and take it in as a part of your world building and get ready to get creative with the rules.
Because again, I think that Genesys, as we have said numerous times, it's not a complete system.
No.
It is the framework so you can start building your setting onto.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's not going to cover everything. And this is where I think that some people are expecting it to. And I hate to break it to those people, but that's not the case.
Give it time. That's why they're
going to need to do some work. But I mean, that's the reason why that fan created content is amazing, because you can steal stuff. Somebody has done now an entire Azeroth setting, so you can now do World of Warcraft.
Yep. Well, Chris is the perfect example of it. He's Harry Potter. Magic is vastly different to the magic that's in the Genesis book.
Yeah.
However, it still follows the same basic
principles,
guidelines, and principles.
Okay, so this is the thing, and to answer his question specifically for Harry Potter, like he brings it up, like, okay, so characters have to learn these spells; they can't just cast anything they want.
Yep.
My response to that is, no, they can cast anything they want. So this was the evolutionary process. Okay, when I started with this setting, I went through like, okay, how am I going to work this out? And you start by doing your research. You start by doing your reading. Go to the Harry Potter Wikia. Just do a search for spells. Do you know how many spells are in canon Harry Potter? There's over 1,200. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and furthermore, when you watch the films and you read the books, these characters, quote unquote, learn spells at the speed of plot. They know what they know when they need to know it.
Yeah.
So no, I had no problem at all saying like, no, they can cast anything they want, because narratively, if you read the books, if you watch the films, these guys just learn spells all the time. With a couple exceptions, they're not diligently in class and rushing out, I've learned this spell. You know, I mean, outside of just a couple key narrative scenes in some of these books.
Yep.
And so, no, I let them cast anything they want, and they get to name it creatively however they want. It's like, you know, very, very basic stuff. The limiting factor I put on was there were literally 5 abilities that are in Harry Potter canon that I said, you know what? These are things that I'm going to put a talent structure around. All right. No, excuse me. 6 abilities I'm going to put a talent structure around, because they're things that we know from canon are specifically not everyone can do. They really have to be learned and studied, and they matter. Yeah. And those things were those. And I made so a tier 3 talent for Patronus Charm. Okay.
Yep.
A tier 4 talent for Animagus.
Yep.
A tier 4 talent for Apparition. Also, tier 4 was the Cruciatus Curse, and then the other 2 unforgivables, the Imperious Curse and the Killing Curse, were tier 5s.
And that's
the way to handle that. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, if I've got anything out of this today, it's talking about that if there is a specific action that you want to have happen in your setting, make it a talent.
Yeah.
You know, if there's something that is not covered by the rules, look at making it a talent, and, you know, work with your GM.
If you want to lock it down, if you're like, look, not everyone should be able to do this. I don't like how freeform magic it is because there's these certain abilities in my setting that should not be freeform.
Yep.
Then make them talents.
Yeah,
but the one thing to remember with that is that if you are making a lot of talents, like I'm talking a lot of talents that are locking magic behind that gateway, this means that any spellcaster is they're going to have to invest a lot of experience into being able to do something that should be available to them.
Sure. You could run into the risk of if you make it that extreme, having talents for lots and lots and lots and lots of things, you could then fall into a few's fine. Like Chris's examples, a few's fine. But I can see a lot of players fall into a trap. A lot of GMs, falling into a trap of making lots of talents to do little things each, tiny little things, but it's still all locked behind talents. If you get too over the top with it, you could end up with a very limited set of 2-dimensional spellcasters who can do one thing. And that's cast spells. But as soon as they get into a scene where spells aren't necessary, watch that character sit there and deflate, because he's not going to be able to do anything.
No,
the beauty about Genesis is you can be a spellcaster and be a hardcore warrior. You can still be a spellcaster and be a charming smuggler or whatever you want to be, because you're not really trading off a lot of your XP to get the ability to spell.
Absolutely.
And if you get too carried away with making things lock behind talents, then one-dimensional characters will start popping up.
Right.
And that is what D&D and similar games suffer from. A spellcaster can usually be pretty flat because all of his experience and all of his talents lie in casting those spells.
True.
This is the problem that Edge of the Empire runs into with the pilot.
Pilots, drivers,
And slices.
any hyper-focused career.
Yep, exactly.
That's what they fall into.
But I think the talent is something that we can talk about infinitum as well in our next episode, where we will continue on with our discussion of magic, which I'm certainly getting into. And it's as much as I'd love to have a 6.5-hour podcast or something like that, that's not necessarily good for people's downloads. So we will limit it.
Nor is it good for Chris and GM Kaitlin's sleeping patterns.
No. Because it's like, what, 2 a.m. in the morning there for you, Chris?
Just about, yeah.
Holy dooly. Okay, all right. So, it's only like 4:45 in the morning, in the afternoon. Anyway, so, we're going to hold the discussion there. We're going to come back to this in the next discussion episode of the Dice Pool podcast, where we will go through a bit more to do with magic and answer some of the questions. Thanks to all of those people who have sent us questions. We will get to them. If not in these few episodes, we should be able to get to them either online or we will cover them later on in behind the screens with our regular segment. But thank you very much, Chris, for joining us today. And hopefully you'll come back to see us next time.
Oh, I wouldn't miss it. Thank you guys for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for letting me storm the castle.
Oh, it's great.
Thank you,
Absolutely
Chris.
Fantastic, because you're
thank you.
a bit of an expert, which is great. So in the meantime, make sure to subscribe and review us on every platform that you listen to us on that brings us your this wonderful podcast. It's a huge help for us, and it's also helps spread the message out to the world in general. So subscribe, comment, review, messages. You can talk to us on Facebook. You can send us emails. You can send smoke signals. I think one stage Huzz suggested that as well.
Sounds like someone else, though. But carrier pigeon. I'm only accepting carrier pigeons now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, or they can send us signals from Space Force. Moving along. We won't make this political.
No, carrier pigeons with little tiny spacesuits on.
Wow. Okay.
Thought of everything.
Right. I want to play in that setting. Anyway, so we basically want to hear what you have to say about us, about the system in general, or really anything. Come along and discuss anything that you'd like. So you can also track us down, as I said, on any of our social media by searching at Dice Pool Podcast on Facebook or on Twitter. You can also find us on YouTube, and you can send us an email, as I said, info@thedicepoolpodcast.com. So I think that was pretty good discussion, guys. Thank you all very much for taking part. Thank you very much, Kaitlin, because I know it's late for you as well.
Not a problem.
So, so that's awesome. I'm glad that you can join us. I know that a number of people asked the question of, is she coming back? Well, she definitely is.
Yeah, you can't get rid of me that easy.
No, damn right. Very good. Well, as we always do, I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
I'm GM Kaitlin.
And I'm GM Chris, wishing you peace, love, and good gaming.
And together, all 5 of us, we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensed swords. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesys Role Playing Game, the Genesys logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.